Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 37, Eye-Catching. At the peak of the mountain, a wild wind was howling. The sovereigns were standing there, atop the peak, chatting amongst themselves. The savage battle going on hundreds of thousands of kilometers away was under their complete surveillance. Wadrid, the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, smiled as he glanced at the nearby chief sovereign of destruction. So this was what you were relying on. 307 starfiends, and these emissaries. I really am impressed that you were able to round up so many fearless 7 starfiends. Unfortunately, your infernal realm still doesn't have much of an advantage. Don't talk until it is all over. The chief sovereign of destruction watched everything with a cold, emotionless gaze. Hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, atop the stellar corridor, the soldiers of the infernal realm and the celestial realm were gripped by madness. Under the leadership of the 307 starfiends and the various emissaries, the soldiers of the infernal realm felt their morale swell. The vast majority of them were at the 6 starfiend level, but a very small number were at the 7 starfiend level. They all wildly launched one mass attack after another. The infernal realm side thundered forward like a flood, blasting attacks outwards with abandon. As for the emissaries who constantly flashed about, dodging and launching ambushes, they were like vipers hidden within the flood waters. There was no fear in the eyes of the 12 winged angels. They led the celestial realm's armies in continuous resistance. 12 winged angels after another fell, but with each death of a 12 winged angels, the infernal realm also paid a heavy price. These angels really are hard to deal with, Beirut said with a soft laugh. They are completely fearless. Even though the infernal realm is fighting in such a berserk manner in the stellar corridor, they aren't able to advance a single step forward. The main thing is, the stellar corridor is only so wide and so high. Linley's gaze swept past the many soldiers, and he shook his head. The infernal realm, in terms of quantity, vastly surpasses the celestial realm in this battle. But the stellar corridor is only so large. At most, 1,000 individuals are able to fight at once. There are 200 or 312 winged angels, all of whom are in a battle formation. They are able to essentially plug up the corridor, and by their sides there are many soldiers of the celestial realm who are supporting them. Linley understood that if the situation was changed to a flat area or a grassland, then, with soldiers filling the skies and charging from every direction, even hundreds of elites wouldn't be able to change the course of battle at all. But this was the final battle within the stellar corridors. The 2 corridors were surrounded by chaotic space. Any of these who fell into the regions of chaotic space would definitely die without question. The 6 of them are finally moving. Linley couldn't help but laugh. Russell, the black-robed Bresl, and the rest of the 6, hidden within the infernal realm's army, were finally making their move. The 6 emissaries, even when moving alone, had been able to kill tens of 12 winged angels. Now, however, the bodies of the 6 emissaries suddenly began to blaze with sovereign power. Whoosh! These 6 emissaries, who had been holding back and lying in wait for a long time, were like 6 bloodthirsty beasts, charging towards a flock of lambs. Darkness! Bresl's voice transmitted to the other 5. Rumble! 6 surges of sovereign power arose, and the 6 formed into the formation of a perfect hexagram star. Light flashed, and in an instant, a terrifying surge of energy arrived within the black-robed Bresl's body. Bresl, carrying the combined power of the 6, stared coldly at the enemies ahead of him as he slashed out with a blade. A blade of darkness. The surface of the blade that flashed out swirled with a dark light, but beneath it was a multicolored light. Bang! Wherever the blade flashed past, space collapsed. Not good. The chief sovereign of light, Augusta, was watching this battle from hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. He couldn't help but let out a low groan. Indeed, the situation was grim. The blade light flashed past at an exceedingly high speed. An angel battle formation of 6 12-winged angels that it passed through instantly crumbled into dust, but the blade light continued to surge forward, transforming yet another 12-winged angel battle formation into dust. Only then did the blade light become powerless, dispersing into a rainbow of colors and collapsing. A single attack had killed 12 12-winged angels. This sight caused the situation on both sides, the celestial realms and the infernal realms, to change immediately. Actually, this was par for the course. The 12-winged angel battle formation, with each attack, was able to annihilate tens of infernal realm soldiers, after all. This samsara battle formation, formed from 6 emissaries, was naturally also capable of killing 12 angels. In addition, this was with the angels being in a battle formation of their own, otherwise, they would have been able to kill tens of them as well. Haha, kill. The infernal realm soldiers felt their morale swell. Kill the 6 of them. The commanders of the celestial realm army immediately gave the order. And at virtually the same instant, 6 angel battle formations, as well as many soldiers of the celestial realm, immediately unleashed their most powerful attacks. Their target? Those 6 emissaries. However, even as the celestial realm's warriors began to coordinate, Bressel's group of 6 executed their second tactic. Wind. Bressel sent mentally with a furious roar. Instantly, 6 surges of sovereign power once more began to flow amongst the 6 of them. Only, this time, it fused into a combination of sovereign power. Around them was now an additional layer of light green sovereign power. Whoosh! The 6 emissaries, in virtually the same instant, began as formless as the wind, disappearing into the infernal realm's army. The many attacks of the celestial realm came to nothing, not able to harm the 6 of them at all. Haha, excellent. A muscular, steely emissary said. Bressel, the idea you came up with really was excellent. Naturally. The black-robed Bressel said with a calm laugh, after each attack, regardless of what the enemy does, immediately flee back and go deep into our main camp, then go forth and attack again, before once more retreating. Humph, their attacks might kill some of the ordinary soldiers, but no matter what else we lack for, we don't lack for ordinary soldiers. And then, Bressel gave the order once more. Wind. The 6 emissaries suddenly dispersed into the 4 directions, pulling apart from each other as they charged towards the front. Earth. Bressel issued the order yet again. The 6 rays of sovereign power once more coalesced, and a deep, ponderous aura of Earth-type sovereign power embraced the area around them. This extremely powerful energy centered around the body of the muscular emissary. The big, tall man stared coldly into the distance, then punched out with his fist, sending it crashing down like a mountain towards the foes up ahead, causing the world itself to shatter. Wind. The 6 emissaries once more flew backwards and retreated. The angels once again suffered huge losses, 12 more 12-winged angels once more perished. Although 12 12-winged angels, compared to the total number of 12-winged angels in the army, wasn't all that many, these emissaries moved and attacked too quickly. If they were able to kill 12 angels in each attack, that meant that in 10 cycles, they would kill 120 angels. There were only 2 companies of angels to begin with, numbering 1,200 in total. And within this corridor, there were only 612 winged angels. The ongoing slaughter and battles had resulted in more than half of the angels being killed by now. There were less than 200 remaining. As for the infernal realms side, of the 300 fiends, less than 100 remained. As for the emissaries, more than half of them had been killed by the counter-attacks of the angels. It was a massacre. Quick, hurry over and reinforce them. The celestial realms officers were growing frantic. Hurry. If we are late, we won't make it in time. The celestial realm still had reserves, the victorious 12 winged angels in the other stellar corridor. There were 612 winged angels in that corridor, and few of them had fallen. More than 512 winged angels remained alive. However, battles between deities could be decided in seconds, most likely, with each second, multiple blows would be exchanged. Bresl and the rest of the 6 emissaries would probably be able to launch more than 10 consecutive attacks in less than 30 seconds. Those 500 plus 12 winged angels, even moving at full speed, would need at least 1 or 2 minutes in order to hurry over to the stellar corridor, and then pass through their own allies towards the front. The various sovereigns fell silent. Everyone could sense what a miserable, deadly encounter this had begun. If those 500 supporting 12 winged angels are able to make it over before those 112 winged angels are killed, then the celestial realm will win. If the infernal realm manages to charge and break through, then they will win. Linley could tell exactly what was going on. Bresl and the rest of the 6 emissaries, as well as the other 9 emissaries on their side, were constantly hunting and killing angels. They alone would be enough to annihilate 100 plus 12 winged angels. Not good. We have to move faster. Bresl sent to the other 5. Victory has already been achieved by the enemy in the other corridor, and in that place, the 612 winged angels suffered comparatively low casualties. Once those 12 winged angels make it over here, we won't have any hope. Russell sent in a growl, move faster. Let's charge into the angel army formations. The other 5 emissaries were all shocked. Previously, they had fought like turtles, ambushing then retreating, then ambushing against. Although this was much safer, it was extremely slow in terms of killing the enemies. We don't have any choice. If this continues, we will definitely lose. The black-robed Bresl gritted his teeth. Execute the final plan. Fine. Let's begin. The 6 emissaries made their decisions almost simultaneously. Although they might very well die if they charged towards their foes and suffered countless assaults, they also might gain victory. Commander General Bell Bayer, we are executing the final plan. The black-robed Bresl sent backwards into the crowd, towards the high command of the infernal realms side. Haha, excellent. Victory or defeat shall be determined by this final tactic. That Commander General immediately gave the order to the various managers of the squads. Instantly, the infernal realms army began to move about in a different manner. The black-robed Bresl and the other 5 emissaries all had solemn looks on their faces. Water! Bresl thundered. Instantly, 6 rays of sovereign power surged forth, and the bodies of Bresl and the rest of the 6 became like water, flooding everywhere. Silently, soundlessly, the 6 charged towards the enemy like a flood, going straight towards the base of the celestial realm. The celestial realm's forces were instantly enraged. The enemy dared to charge straight for them. Join forces. Kill them. Not hesitating at all, many of the celestial realm's soldiers and angels immediately cooperated in attacking those 6. Unfortunately, the 6 seeped through their defenses like water, and the group attacks actually ended up killing some of their own people. But more importantly, this water tactic was the most defensively power technique available to Bresl's group. In addition, everyone present either had a defensive sovereign artifact or a soul-protecting sovereign artifact. The combined defensive power of the 6 was simply too powerful, especially after they used the water tactic. Haha, Bresl and the others had weathered the attacks without dying. They immediately began to launch their own berserk attacks. Earth. Darkness. The 6 of them, based on their own elements and attributes, had developed a total of 4 supreme tactics for the formation: darkness, water, wind, and earth. Earth and darkness were for attack, wind was for fleeing and moving about, while water was the most defensively powerful. After having charged into the center of the angel forces, they no longer had anything to fear. Everyone around them was an enemy, they could strike about as they pleased. As for sovereign power, Linley had given each of them 100 drops. They had more than enough. Kill. The soldiers of the infernal realm, along with some 7 star fiends, thundered forward like an unstoppable flood. Because the angels had been thrown into a state of complete chaos by those 6 emissaries, they weren't able to mount an effective defense at all to block the infernal realm. Instantly, the celestial realm finally began to slowly retreat. The infernal realm soldiers all struck out towards the celestial realm's side with relentless attacks, which lessened the pressure on Bresl and the other 5 as well. Haha, wipe out all of these angels. The infernal realm's side was going berserk. Originally, only 100 angels remained, but under the frenetic assault of Bresl's group, another half of them were killed. Actually, given the combined defensive power of Bresl's group, most likely nearly 112 winged angels would need to join forces to kill them. However, in the midst of this chaos, when there were only 100 or so 12 winged angels to begin with, and with the other emissaries and 7 star fiends causing trouble as well, the angels were completely unable to join together into an effective group attack that could annihilate Bresl's group of 6. In the blink of an eye, only 50 or 60 angels remained. In the face of this flood-like surge of soldiers of the infernal realm, and against the hammer blows that fell down upon them from the skies, another half instantly died. Retreat. A frantic retreat. The ordinary soldiers of the celestial realm were not angels, they had egos and personal desires. They could make their own choices. We won't make it in time. The 500 angels from the other corridor had finally arrived at the borders of this one. However, it was the crumbling, retreating celestial realm army which welcomed them. Charge in. The 512 winged angels, when faced with this wave of defeated soldiers, found it difficult to advance deeper, especially while the infernal realm side filled the skies with material attacks and soul attacks as they struck out with abandon. In all but the blink of an eye, the infernal realm soldiers charged all the way to the end of the stellar corridor. Rumble. The rainbow light above the stellar corridor vanished. Both sides had each obtained victory in a corridor. This planar war was a draw. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 38, Lies. Haha. Loud, excited, jubilant laughter rang out from the stellar corridor. Success. It's over. Those surviving emissaries, including Bresl's group of 6, and the soldiers of the infernal realm all revealed smiles on their faces. They were excited, not because they had fought to a draw, but because they were still alive. They had managed to survive this terrifying planar war. Of the 307 star fiends, only 40 or so remained alive. Naturally, the survivors would rejoice. Hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, at the peak of the mountain, the sovereigns were all chatting amongst themselves energetically as well. Orloff, this time, you lose. The chief sovereign of destruction, Wadrid, finally revealed a hint of a smile on his face. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, chuckled. Haha, Wadrid, since we fought to a draw, it can be said that I lost this round. However, Wadrid, the main reason why your infernal realm side was able to win was because of those 6 emissaries who set up a formation. Which sovereign is in control of those 6? Orloff didn't seem dispirited or discouraged by the defeat at all. He smiled, as cheerful as ever. Those are the 6 emissaries under Linley's command. The chief sovereign of destruction said. Oh. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, couldn't help but turn and look at Linley. The sovereigns that were listening to the conversation between these 2 chief sovereigns also turned to look towards Linley. So those 6 individuals who had such a major impact on this planar war were emissaries under Linley's command. Linley, you helped out Wadrid tremendously, this time. Orloff laughed as he looked at Linley. Linley said with a calm laugh, all I provided was 6 emissaries. If you, Lord Orloff, had been able to locate a high god paragon, that person would have been able to kill 1 or 212 winged angels with ease, if going all out. A paragon would have been able to change the results of the battle as well. When the 6 of them joined forces, in the battle, they were indeed roughly as effective as a paragon would have been. High God Paragon? How many of those high God paragons would be willing to risk their lives and participate in this planar war? The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, laughed softly. If there was no danger involved, they might be willing to assist, but given how dangerous this event was, none of them were willing to enter. To paragons, not even sovereign artifacts were that important. What else, then, could sovereigns use to entice high god paragons into participating? Nothing. And so, naturally, none of the paragons were willing to take place in the battle. Linley, I'm quite curious. Which of the emissaries under your control was able to develop that battle formation? The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, suddenly asked. This battle formation is known as the Samsara battle formation. It was developed by one of my emissaries, who spent countless years researching it. Linley didn't try to hide anything. Samsara battle formation, Samsara, Samsara. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, murmured these words a few times, then nodded slightly to himself. Then, he turned to look at Linley, smiling and nodding towards him as well. That emissary under your command is, without a doubt, a supreme master at developing magical formations. He was able to develop such a queer union that wastes so little energy. Even I have to admit feeling admiration for him. Hey, Orloff, how is it that you are so happy, even after losing? The chief sovereign of death laughed lightly. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, said with a calm smile, victory, defeat. To gain, to lose, these are only comparative concepts. You can't judge victory or defeat just from the surface of events, haha, the chief sovereign of fate laughed happily and without worry. Everyone, I won't remain here any longer. I'll return to the celestial realm now. Right, Linley. Orloff suddenly turned to look towards Linley, then said with a laugh, when you are free, you must come for a stroll in my Orloff gardens. I've invited you over many times now. Definitely, definitely. Linley immediately responded. And so, Orloff immediately led the sovereigns of the celestial realm into a spatial tier that he created. Orloff, Linley had to let out a praising sigh in his heart. In recent days, he had interacted with the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, on numerous occasions. Linley was beginning to rather admire this Orloff. Regardless of victory or defeat, he appears so calm and collected, as though there is nothing in the world which can enrage him. Linley let out a sigh of praise. If Orloff had won this planar war, he would have gained an additional portion of will as reward. But Orloff didn't seem to be moved at all by either victory or defeat, he didn't seem even the slightest bit dispirited. This sort of mental equanimity was something which none of the other sovereigns could match. The Infernal Realm. The Skirite Mountains. Half a year had passed since the conclusion of the planar war. Linley's residence was as peaceful as ever. Wade's gone out for adventuring as well. Linley walked onto his spacious balcony, staring towards the distant Barrack clan descendants who were in a grassy area. All of them have a love for battle. It seems as though they won't be able to stay here for long. Soon, these descendants will all go out and test themselves in adventures. Linley exited the walkway, turning and entering a quiet, secluded garden. Bibi and Nissa were chatting about something in one corner of the garden, and the two were both laughing gaily. Linley turned and saw his father, Hogg, and his mother, Lena. They walked out from the gates of the garden. Linley. A constant smile was on Hogg's face. Father. Mother. Linley immediately bowed. There's something I want to discuss with you. Hogg said with a laugh. Recently, your mother and I are preparing to go traveling through some of the material planes for a tour. Would you and Delia like to accompany us? There were simply too many material planes, and many of them had their own unique attributes. Some had unique races, while others had different, unique cultures. To go touring the countless material planes of the universe was far more interesting than simply remaining in the infernal realm. No need. Linley laughed, refusing as he shook his head. This kid, Hogg couldn't help but shake his head and chuckle resignedly. His mother, Lena, said with a laugh, "Hogg, don't force Linley. He can go whenever he feels like it." Linley had a divine fire clone, and was able to enter any material plane he desired. Linley bade his parents farewell, then left by himself. Within a secluded courtyard. This was the place where Linley normally trained. He stood there, atop the grass, spreading his fused divine sense across the entire infernal realm. 10,000 years, such a long journey. Within Linley's mind, images of his history, starting from when he was a toddler, began to flash past. Father. Grandpa Doering. Bibi. Wharton. Delia. Boss Yale. George. Reynolds, all of their appearances floated through his mind. These people had imprinted themselves deep within Linley's soul. But suddenly, Linley thought of someone. Mother. When Linley thought of his mother, Lena, Linley couldn't help but sigh to himself. Although his mother, Lena, quickly grew close with his father, Hogg, after the passage of countless years, there was still a certain distance between Lena and Linley and Wharton. Lena didn't truly hold any motherly love towards her two children, Linley and Wharton. How could Linley and Wharton not tell? Alas. That's because mother lost all of her memories from before she was an angel. Linley sighed in his heart. But right at this moment. Whoosh! A figure descended from the skies. Lord Wadred. Linley saw that the newcomer was the chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred. The black-robed Wadred had a smile on his face. Linley, last time, during the Planar War, the 6 emissaries you sent out were extremely effective. I know that you spent centuries in your search for the 6 of them. I've never come to thank you for what you did. Lord Wadred, I had to find emissaries for myself eventually. Linley laughed. Linley was on excellent terms with the chief sovereign of destruction. Haha, enough of that, Linley. I definitely owe you a favor. The chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, said with a laugh, if there's anything you need, as long as I can accomplish it, you can have me do it. In fact, even if you want to learn some supreme secrets, I can reveal them to you. But of course, you can forget about learning my space-time paradox. Wadred was quite forthright about this. Although space-time paradox was inferior to the fused innate divine ability of the 4 divine beasts, it still increased one's power 1,000-fold. Even someone like Linley, upon learning this technique, would be able to threaten the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. Thus, Wadred couldn't possibly teach it to him. Haha, Lord Wadred, even if you didn't say that outright, I wouldn't possibly have asked you to teach me your supreme technique, just because I helped out a bit. You, Lord Wadred, put far too much effort into devising it. Linley laughed calmly. Right. After the Planar War concluded and Lord Orloff lost, did he have any sort of special reaction? What sort of a reaction could he have? Same as always, he stays in his Orloff gardens, absorbed in training and research. The chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, let out a sigh. Orloff, that madman. He has no idea what being tired even means. To be honest, of the chief sovereigns of the edicts, Orloff is the only one who makes me feel uneasy. You can never know what sort of supreme technique Orloff might come up with, because that madman simply can't be judged in accordance with normal logic. Linley couldn't help but laugh. He could feel the chief sovereign of destruction's discontent. He had worked so hard to develop his supreme technique, space-time paradox, and yet wasn't able to defeat Orloff. But of course, that was only because Orloff had an Overgod artifact. Enough about him. Just now, when I came over, I saw that you were in a rather poor mood. You had a rather unhappy look on your face. Did something troublesome occur? Wadred smiled. Even chief sovereigns had emotions and personalities. Although the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts were rather arrogant and aloof, they, too, needed friends. After Linley had displayed his power, their attitude towards Linley had changed somewhat as well. In addition, because of the planar war, Wadred had come to view Linley as the second most powerful figure on his side. As for who the number 1 figure was, that was naturally Wadred himself. And so, because they were on somewhat closer terms now, they became more casual in their manner of speech as well. Oh! There is indeed something rather troublesome. Only, there's no point in telling you. Linley let out a sigh. His mother had become an angel, but her former memories were lost. There was nothing that could be changed about that. Why don't you give it a try? Wadred said with a laugh. Linley let out another sigh. This has to do with my mother. When my mother was in her material plane, she was seized by the local light-aligned religion, and her soul was sacrificed to the sovereigns. My mother became an angel, and a 12-winged angel at that. I once sought out Augusta and paid a very high price to have him restore my mother to her freedom. She does have her freedom now, but, my mother's former memories are forever lost. What did you say? The chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, actually frowned. What? Is there a way for angels to regain their memories? Linley couldn't help but grow rather excited. How could he have possibly chosen to let your mother regain her free will? The chief sovereign of destruction stared solemnly at Linley. Linley. Let me tell you this. To release an angel and let the angel regain freedom, there are only 2 methods, and I dare say that Augusta wouldn't choose either of them. Linley was stunned. What are you saying? But that day, Augusta seemed to have been badly injured, his soul. Ha ha. The chief sovereign of destruction began to laugh coldly. An injury to his soul? That was nothing more than a pretense. Linley, I can tell you one thing, if an angel truly regains free will, then that angel will naturally regain its former memories as well. What did you say? Linley's face changed. How can this be? Your mother doesn't have her memories back, which signifies one thing, your mother is still under control, and hasn't regained her freedom at all. The chief sovereign of destruction laughed coldly. As I see it, your mother is just obeying his orders. She's intentionally putting on a pretense of being free, that way, without having to pay any price at all, Augusta was able to make you pay a heavy price. Why wouldn't he want to carry out such an excellent bargain? Linley's face changed dramatically as he listened. And, given how poor the relationship is between you and him, why would he have to worry about keeping his word to you? The chief sovereign of destruction snickered. But Orloff was also, Linley said hurriedly. Orloff? Orloff had something he wanted from Augusta, and in addition, Augusta has helped out Orloff multiple times. Orloff owed Augusta a favor. You tell me. Would Orloff help him, or help you? The chief sovereign of destruction laughed coldly. Orloff doesn't get involved in any worldly affairs or struggles, but that doesn't mean he's this wonderful, altruistic person. Let me put it to you simply. You were completely and utterly deceived by Augusta. The chief sovereign of destruction said. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 39, Linley's Fiery Rage. He had been completely and utterly deceived. It was fake. A lie. Augusta. Linley felt a surge of nameless fire instantly fill his chest. That bastard. Augusta had actually dared to deceive him in this matter. The nearby chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, snickered. Linley, can it be that you don't know what sort of a person this Augusta is? Overbearing, greedy, sinister. For the sake of achieving his goals, there's nothing he won't do. You actually trusted him that easily. Linley's forehead was deeply furrowed as he frowned. I know all these things. Only, Orloff was present, and I rather trusted Orloff. However, it's too late. Lord Wadred, why is it that you are so certain that Augusta deceived me? Why is it that angels will definitely regain their memories upon regaining their freedom? For now, Linley couldn't fully believe all these things, as they were just words coming from a single person, the chief sovereign of destruction. The chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, said with absolute certainty, Linley, I'll tell you this. One of the 7 sovereigns of light has allied himself with me, and so I have a great deal of knowledge regarding angels. Linley listened quietly, and the chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, said with a solemn expression, angels are reborn from the angelic resurrection pools. Every single angelic resurrection pool is connected to the soul of its sovereign of light. Thus, every single angel born from the angelic resurrection pools are under the command of their sovereign of light. Linley nodded. The chief sovereign of destruction continued, there are different levels of angelic resurrection pools, there are only 2 high-level ones, and only these 2 are able to give birth to 12 winged angels. These 2 were both taken over by Augusta, who controls them personally. There are 2 ways to allow your mother, a 12-winged angels, to regain her freedom. One is to kill Augusta. Once Augusta dies, the angelic resurrection pools will become items without masters, and so the angels linked to it will have their souls released as well. Naturally, they will regain their freedom. Linley nodded. He knew about this method. The second method is to have Augusta remove his bond with the angelic resurrection pool which is connected with your mother's soul. Once his bond is released, the angelic resurrection pool will become an ownerless item, and all of the angels that were born through it will also lose their spiritual connection to Augusta, and thus regain freedom. The chief sovereign of destruction laughed coldly. Linley, once the bond with the angelic resurrection pool is broken, every single angel that pool has ever created, including your mother, will regain their freedom. Your mother is a 12-winged angels, while there are only 2 pools that can give birth to 12 winged angels. You want Augusta, for the sake of your mother, to relinquish his bond with an angelic resurrection pool for 12 winged angels. That means he would lose half of his 12 winged angels. They would regain their freedom and no longer be under his control. The chief sovereign of destruction snickered. If he really had let your mother regain her freedom, then during the planar war, how could he have been willing to send out a total of 1,212 winged angels? Linley now completely understood. There was, in reality, only one way for his mother to regain her freedom, to make it so that the angelic resurrection pool linked with her soul became an ownerless item. And there were only 2 ways to do that, the first, to kill Augusta. The second, for Augusta to relinquish the pool. But how could Augusta possibly give it up? Giving it up meant giving up all of the angels that pool had ever created. Bastard! Linley couldn't help but growl and curse. No point in being angry now. Wadred laughed coldly. But Linley was frantically calculating certain things in his mind. One thought in particular constantly circulated through his thoughts. Kill Augusta. Kill him right away. Lord Wadred. Linley said hurriedly. The angels that the sovereign controls, can the sovereign kill them just by willing it? Not necessarily. Wadred shook his head and laughed. It depends on where the angel is. If the angel and the sovereign are on different planes, then the sovereign won't be able to kill that angel. Linley suddenly understood. It was like the master-servant bond which was used to control magical beasts. Upon the bond being established, the master could easily cause the magical beast's death. However, if the master and the servant were on different planes, they would at most be able to vaguely sense each other's location. There was no way they would be able to communicate through the soul, nor would the master have a way to kill the servant. Linley and Bibi, on different planes, weren't able to speak through their soul connection either. Whew! Linley internally let out a sigh of relief. On the surface, though, Linley looked quite calm. Bowing, he said, "Lord Wadred, I truly must thank you. If it wasn't for you, I might have been deceived by Augusta for an extremely long period of time." Linley and the Chief Sovereign of Destruction chatted for a while longer, and then Wadred left. Soon afterwards, Linley sent his Wind-type Sovereign clone away from the Infernal Realm, to pay a visit to the Chief Sovereign of Death in the Netherworld. Half a day later, Linley immediately invited Beirut and Bluefire over to discuss something. "What did you say?" Beirut and Bluefire were both so shocked, they rose to their feet. "Right. I was deceived." Linley shook his head. "An angel who truly regains her freedom and who is no longer under control will regain her former memories." "Are you certain?" Beirut and Bluefire both said in unison. "I'm very certain. This news was brought to me by Wadred, and just now, my Wind-type Sovereign clone went to the Netherworld to pay a visit to the Chief Sovereign of Death. I personally raised this issue with her, and the Chief Sovereign of Death personally told me that there were indeed only two ways to have an angel regain her freedom. In addition, upon regaining freedom and upon breaking free from the bewildering soul control of the angelic resurrection pool, they will naturally regain their former memories." Linley said in a low voice. Beirut and Bluefire exchanged a glance, a hint of shock in their eyes. "Since even the Chief Sovereign of Death says it is so, then it seems it is true," Beirut said in a low voice. "I didn't imagine that we'd actually be deceived like this." Bluefire frowned. It was one matter if someone else deceived them, but the deceiver was Augusta. Augusta, with whom they had an irreconcilable grudge to begin with. Beirut and Bluefire both felt this way, and Linley felt this way all the more. After all, he was the one who had handed over the blood essences of the four divine beasts. "Linley, what is your decision?" Beirut asked. Bluefire looked towards Linley as well. "Wait." Linley growled. "Wait." The two couldn't help but be puzzled. "My father and my mother will go for a tour of the material planes. Once they leave, I will make my move," Linley said calmly. "Right. For now, your mother cannot be trusted?" Beirut nodded as well. Now that they had a plan, they naturally would carry it out. Half a month later, Hogg and his wife, Lena, were personally escorted by Linley to the interplanar teleportation array. Holding the sovereign medallion which Linley had given them, they were teleported to a material plane and began their touring journey. They had no idea that upon departing, a terrifying storm would arise in the higher planes. "Father and mother have departed." Linley's gaze was abyssally cold. Beirut and Bluefire, by his side, exchanged a glance. "Mother is not in the infernal realm. Even if Augusta came here, he wouldn't be able to kill Mother. As for the people of the Skirite Mountains, I'd like to ask the two of you to help out. As long as Augusta attacks from trillions of kilometers away, I imagine you two should be able to protect the Skirite Mountains." Linley turned to look at them. Beirut couldn't help but begin to laugh. "Haha, Linley, sovereigns aren't even able to kill a paragon from trillions of kilometers away. There is a limit to their attack power. How could Bluefire and I be unable to protect the Skirite Mountains? Then I'll stop worrying." Linley finished speaking. Then immediately flew towards the teleportation array. "Linley, be careful." Beirut and Bluefire both sent towards him. "Stay in the infernal realm, and wait for me to contact you." Linley's form disappeared from within the distant teleportation array. Bluefire turned to look at Beirut, then said with a frown, "Beirut, I don't know why, but I feel a sense of dread. I hope nothing amiss will occur on Linley's journey." "Nothing will," Beirut said with absolute certainty. "Augusta is nothing more than the Chief Sovereign of Light. His Overgod weapon isn't suited to his nature. How strong can he possibly be? As long as he doesn't run into Orloff, there won't be any problems. In addition, Linley is a person who knows when to advance and when to retreat. And, most importantly of all, he has his fused divine sense, which vastly surpasses an ordinary sovereign's divine sense. Right. Bluefire relaxed slightly. With the fused divine sense, Linley would be able to easily locate his enemy, but his enemy wouldn't notice Linley's arrival. The divine light plane. Bang. A figure suddenly flashed past the skies, advancing forward at such speed that even the divine plane's spatial fabric trembled. A sky-blue-robed Linley, his face emotionless, his gaze cold, stared into the distance. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, isn't here. Linley's fused divine sense was able to easily discover that at the residence of Augusta, the chief sovereign of light, Augusta was by himself within his lavishly adorned island, enjoying the ministrations of his maids. As for the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, the only one who Linley was concerned about, he wasn't there. Linley's gaze turned knife-sharp. That island has a total of 2 sovereigns of light. The other is a mere lesser sovereign. Linley paid no attention to that sovereign at all. Augusta. A killing intent surged within Linley's breast, and his fury continued to blaze. The hopes of the 4 clan leaders. The hatred his clan bore. Linley never forgot about these things, not for a single day. Beirut had been forced to hide in the Yulon plain, not daring to emerge. An attempt to kill Linley himself, only for the sake of his Overgod weapon. And now lying to him, deceiving him to acquire the blood essences of the 4 ancestors. Augusta's actions clearly indicated that he had no desire whatsoever to resolve the grudge between himself and Linley. Similarly, deep within Linley's heart, he had never given up his plans for revenge. A figure suddenly appeared in the air above the lavish island. He really knows how to enjoy himself. Linley lowered his head, staring downwards. His right hand suddenly pressed down towards the island. Rumble, an extremely, terrifyingly powerful aura swept out as the illusion of a palm that was thousands of kilometers long suddenly appeared out of nowhere. This enormous illusory palm crushed downwards, instantly causing the world below to tremble. The lavishly decorated island instantly, silently, was reduced to smithereens. Instantly, a large number of angels and other women flew out, into the air. 2 figures hung there in the sky. It was the chief sovereign of light, Augusta, and the other sovereign of light. Augusta's face was filled with rage, and when he saw the distant Linley, his eyes turned completely round. He roared in anger, "Linley, what are you doing? I felt uncomfortable, looking at your island. So, I destroyed it?" Linley said calmly. It wasn't that Augusta was unable to block Linley's attack. In reality, Linley hadn't infused his attack with much power, as he had dispersed it over a very large area of thousands of kilometers. The main issue was, Linley had used his fused divine sense, and so Augusta had no idea that Linley had arrived. Linley had suddenly struck out of nowhere with that giant palm, and by the time Augusta was able to react, his island had already been reduced to dust. "You felt uncomfortable, looking at my island." Augusta's pupils contracted. He now understood that Linley had come to make trouble for him, and he said in an icy voice, "Linley, you want to fight with me?" Whoosh! Instantly, the many angels and maids nearby scattered towards the 4 directions. Good heavens! 2 chief sovereigns were able to do battle? If they remained here, they would definitely be courting death. Linley is about to battle the chief sovereign. The other sovereign of light also hurriedly retreated, a look of shock appearing on his handsome face. "Fight with you?" Linley's abyssally cold gaze stared death at the Augusta, and then, quite bizarrely, Linley cracked his lips into a smile. This smile made Augusta's heart suddenly clench. The life Overgod sword suddenly appeared in Linley's hands. Not hesitating at all, he swept the life Overgod sword out, tearing through space with it. Rumble, the surrounding area completely collapsed, and a fierce aura of energy, as sharp as an awl, created one massive spatial rift after another. An utterly irresistible, inky jade sword light suddenly stabbed towards Augusta. "Augusta, today is the day you die." Linley's cold voice rang out like thunder, reverberating within Augusta's mind. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 40, A Battle of Chief Sovereigns. Augusta's face was savage. Letting out a low growl, he slashed out with the lightsaber in his hand in a circular arc clang. The two Overgod weapons clashed. The center of the collision created a terrifying series of ripples which spread out in every direction. Countless spatial rifts appeared as the nearby space cracked like the shell of a turtle. Augusta was knocked flying back by the collision. His body swayed in midair, then he once more found his bearings as he stared at Linley in some amazement. "Linley, no wonder you dare claim you will kill me. So your power actually nearly doubled." Augusta stared at Linley. "I've grown more powerful, but you haven't," Linley said emotionlessly. "Haha, who knows which one of us will live, and which one will die." Augusta actually began to laugh. With a crackling sound, Linley's entire body became covered with those inky jade draconic scales. Those savage spikes jutted out as Linley instantly dragon-formed. "Really?" Linley let out a cold laugh. Linley's entire body slowly transformed into a streak of light which shot at high speed towards Augusta, who was kilometers away in the sky. 4 chief sovereigns, traversing a distance of a few kilometers, in this sort of frantic battle, required less than a millionth of a second. From this, one could imagine how quickly the two were exchanging blows. Clang! Clang! 2 Overgod weapons clashed repeatedly against each other, and the surrounding space began to splinter and shatter. Each time, Augusta was knocked flying backwards. It appeared as though Augusta was at a disadvantage, but clearly, each time Augusta was able to hold on. "You want to kill me? It won't be that easy," Augusta chortled. But there was no smile on Linley's face. "It's about time," Linley murmured to himself. From the beginning of the battle till now, Linley had only revealed a small part of his true power, because Linley was worried that if he unleashed his most powerful sword blow, if he didn't succeed on the very first strike, the enemy would be so frightened that he would immediately flee. That would make things troublesome. After all, Linley's attack power might have increased, but his speed hadn't. The fusing of the different profound mysteries had implications for his sword intent technique, but in terms of speed, Linley hadn't improved significantly. "Die!" Linley growled in his mind. After the two exchanged yet another series of blows, Linley's life Overgod sword once more tore through the sky like before, striking towards Augusta. That inky jade sword energy billowed forth in a slightly chaotic manner. As for Augusta, he blocked Linley's sword attack in the same manner he had previously, but as the two drew close to each other. The life Overgod sword's rather disorderly, chaotic inky jade sword energy seemed to suddenly organize, like soldiers entering a formation, forming a beam of inky jade sword energy that was as thick as a man's waist. His most powerful attack exploded forth. Bang! The sword energy flashed, striking heavily against the lightsaber. Augusta's face instantly whitened. He could sense an irresistible force crush down against his lightsaber, knocking it against his body. A golden light suddenly flashed. The surrounding area was reduced to nothingness, and Augusta himself had disappeared. Had Augusta been reduced into dust? He was only heavily wounded. Linley frowned. His fused divine sense allowed him to clearly see that Augusta, a large hole in his chest and his face ashen, had actually borrowed from the impact of their blows to flee at high speed into a rift in chaotic space. "I didn't expect that Augusta would be able to take a blow from my most powerful sword attack without dying." Not hesitating at all, Linley increased his speed to the limit as he too charged into chaotic space. A battle between sovereigns simply drew too much attention. Within the divine light plane, 4 of the other sovereigns sensed the battle. They naturally spread out their divine sense to encompass the entire divine plane, and thus they witnessed this battle. The chief was nearly killed? Fortunately, that ray of sword light only blew a hole through his chest after expending some of its power on the defending lightsaber. That's the only reason why he was able to survive. That sword attack is simply too powerful. Lord Linley, in the past, had been hiding his true strength. The power of that attack, just now, inconceivable. The four sovereigns of light were completely stunned. Given the chief's ability in fleeing, I imagine it will take some time before they can determine who will live and who will die. I imagine that in this battle, one of the two will die. If the chief dies, that will be a major event. The four sovereigns of light, while chatting amongst each other through divine sense, all began to move as well. Some of them tore holes through reality and entered chaotic space, so as to use their divine sense to watch Linley and Augusta battle. Others immediately used the teleportation arrays to go to the other planes, so as to inform the chief sovereigns they had allied themselves with. It was only natural that they would report such a major affair. Deep within the chaotic sea, there was an underwater city at the bottom of the ocean which was 10,000 kilometers in circumference. This city, Sable Leviathan City, was one of the three homes for the chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred. Chief, Linley and Augusta have begun to fight. The two have already battled their way into chaotic space. By the looks of it, Augusta is probably going to die. A sovereign of light had traveled to the infernal realm through the teleportation array, then immediately used his divine sense to notify the chief sovereign of destruction regarding this matter. The death of one chief sovereign guaranteed that another one would be born. If Augusta truly were to die, then a free high sovereign spark would be created. Within a cold, gloomy estate in the northern area of Sable Leviathan City. Linley and Augusta. The chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, let out a sigh as his eyes lit up. I didn't expect that shortly after I informed Linley, he would immediately go kill Augusta. He really is quite mad. At the same time, he waved his hand as though he were opening a curtain, tearing a rift in reality. His body flickered, and he entered chaotic space. A black-robed Wadred stood there in the middle of chaotic space. He spread out his divine sense, easily discovering Linley and Augusta, who were currently battling each other. By the looks of it, Linley holds an absolute advantage. Augusta seems to be in bad shape. Wadred laughed. Oh, Augusta has indeed decided to fly towards the celestial realm. However, Linley's speed is slightly faster than his. Augusta probably won't survive his attempt to reach the celestial realm. Within the multicolored bursts of chaotic energy, Linley and Augusta, one fled up ahead, one chased from behind. Linley held his life Overgod sword in his hands, his dark golden eyes staring coldly towards the front. Augusta's life-preserving skills are quite formidable. He was actually able to receive 2 sword blows from me without dying. Linley couldn't help but sigh in amazement, in his heart. His attack power was far greater than his opponent's. Logically speaking, he should have been able to kill Augusta with 1 blow. However, whenever his sword energy struck his foe, Augusta would use his lightsaber and a special life-saving technique to sacrifice the other parts of his body, while protecting his critical parts and preserving his life. In addition, just now, when I executed my innate divine ability, Dragon Shout, the impact on him was quite small. Linley, by now, truly had to admit that in terms of soul defense, Augusta was truly too powerful. His sword intent technique contained both a material and a soul attack component, and yet the soul attack component didn't appear to do anything at all. Still, the current Augusta was in quite a sorry shape. Linley. Augusta, utterly enraged, bellowed angrily, "Don't go too far. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, owes me a favor. You should know this. If you force me to use it, then when I arrive in the celestial realm, you will definitely die. I'm unable to defeat the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, but that's only if he is here to save you. You have to at least escape to the celestial realm first. But you, Augusta, you want to escape from me and make it to the celestial realm? In your dreams. Linley snickered. The distance between himself and Augusta was measurably shrinking. Very soon, Linley would give him yet another sword blow. Augusta bellowed furiously, I withstood your first 2 blows, and I'll be able to withstand your third and fourth ones as well. You won't be able to kill me. Is that so? Linley laughed coldly. Augusta, I admit that your life-saving sword techniques are quite marvelous. You are actually able to guide away and dissipate much of my beam of sword energy. However, the difference in power is too great. No matter how marvelous your techniques are, it is useless. Enough. I already told you, you won't be able to escape. Linley was now extremely close to Augusta. But the strange thing was, Linley didn't attack. Augusta felt puzzled and confused as well. But Linley just laughed coldly, continuing to draw close to Augusta. When the two were less than 10 meters apart. Ha ha, suddenly, loud laughter rang out. To be precise, 3 loud laughs rang out. Linley's body suddenly split into 3. One was the dragon-formed Linley, the second was the blue-haired Linley, while the third was a green-haired Linley. Clearly, Linley was now completely unleashing the power of all 3 of his sovereign clones. Swish! Swish! His wind-type sovereign clone and his water-type sovereign clone pincer attacked Augusta from the side. They were no slower than Augusta himself. Suddenly, a ray of sword light flashed out from the life Overgod sword in the dragon-formed Linley's hands. That thick pillar of sword light carried an extremely fierce power, and Augusta was forced to slow down, so as to focus his energy in dealing with the attack. The lightsaber in his hand slashed out in a marvelous arc. Bang! The beam of sword energy once more pierced through the right side of his chest, and even his shoulder blade was completely shattered. Not good. Augusta looked around himself. Indeed, Linley's wind-type sovereign clone and water-type sovereign clone, along with his dragon-formed original body, had formed into a triangle, trapping him within. Because he had slowed down slightly when blocking Linley's sword attack, Linley had enough time to surround him. Augusta, where can you go, now? Linley laughed coldly at him. Augusta looked around himself. Very suddenly, he stabbed out with his sword towards Linley's wind-type sovereign clone, attacking so quickly that he was like a ray of light flashing through the darkness. Clang! Within the hand of the wind-type sovereign clone appeared a sovereign weapon, the blood-violet sword. It clashed viciously against the blade of the lightsaber. Augusta's body trembled, and his face couldn't help but change. Still want to run? Linley laughed coldly. Last time he had fought Augusta, Linley had been forced to rely on his life Overgod sword in order to fight Augusta to a standstill. Back then, Linley hadn't dared to use his other sovereign clones to block Augusta. Those other clones didn't have any Overgod artifacts, and so they definitely would have been killed by Augusta with 1 blow each. But now, even without Overgod artifacts, Linley's sovereign clones were still able to just barely withstand Augusta's blows. Augusta's formerly savage, berserk, bedraggled appearance suddenly changed. He became icy calm. Linley. Augusta swept Linley's 3 sovereign clones with his gaze. Why must you go so far and force me to such a state? Last time, you came to ask me to grant your mother her freedom back, and I released her, even though my soul was badly damaged, and gave her will back to her. I truly didn't imagine that less than 1,000 years later, you would actually come kill me. Linley laughed. Laughed from utter rage. Your soul was badly damaged? You gave my mother her freedom back. Augusta, at a time like this, you still are as shameless as to make this claim. Linley snickered. Augusta raised an eyebrow, then laughed as well. Oh, so you actually already knew. Augusta's laughter was so bright. You are able to laugh, at a time like this. Linley sent out his fused divine sense, stretching it out as far as he could. He saw that there were at least 6 sovereigns within chaotic space, watching this battle through their own sovereign sense. Linley, aren't you curious as to why I'm able to withstand your most powerful sword blow? Augusta laughed. At the same time, a golden aura of light appeared on his body, and his revealed skin slowly took on a golden hue. Golden. Linley's heart trembled. He couldn't help but think back to the battle between the chief sovereigns of destruction and fate. The chief sovereign of fate had relied on his right hand, covered with golden light, to block the Overgod weapon attack from the chief sovereign of fate. But of course, that was also because the chief sovereign of fate had tremendously powerful will and a deep understanding of the profound mysteries as well. Last time, when I collected the blood essences of the 4 divine beasts from you, I knew that there would come a day when you would return for revenge. Augusta laughed softly. I also knew that it would be very hard for me to become a paragon. Thus, I made a trade with the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff. I used the favor he owed me and the blood essences, exchanging them for him teaching me his golden samsara body technique, his supreme defensive technique which he had spent countless years researching. Lord Orloff, who now already possesses the supreme technique, space-time paradox, no longer cares as much about his golden samsara body technique as he once did. Originally, I didn't want to reveal this technique. Augusta laughed as he looked at Linley. But Linley, you increased in power by far too much. Just because your body is tough, you think you can withstand my life Overgod sword. Linley let out a disdainful laugh. Not even the chief sovereign of fate wouldn't dare to use any other part of his body to withstand a blow from an Overgod weapon. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 41, Can he actually be? Whoosh. Within the multicolored reaches of chaotic space, illusory meteors of light and energy flew everywhere, forming the flood of rainbow-colored chaotic energy that filled the region. More than 10 figures were standing there within chaotic space, astonishment on all of their faces. I didn't imagine that Orloff actually taught his golden samsara body to Augusta. Humph, the blood essences of the 4 divine beasts, in the end, they ended up in Orloff's hands. The chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, had a sunken, sinister look on his face. It seems that Linley traded the blood essences of the 4 divine beasts to Augusta, and Augusta then gave it to Orloff. The look on Wadred's face grew increasingly ugly. Linley, ugh. Wadred felt frustration burning in his chest. Right at this moment, however, a hazy, illusory phantom began to emerge from Augusta's body. Linley was startled. He grew cautious, instantly fusing his water-type sovereign clone and wind-type sovereign clone back into his main body. Linley, if you want to stay alive, you'd best depart. Augusta said coldly. If you have any techniques, put them on display. Otherwise, I'm going to strike again. Linley seemed quite magnanimous, but in reality, he was extremely cautious right now. He no longer felt certain he knew everything there was to know about Augusta. If he continued to attack with abandon, he might be tricked. It was best to be careful and defend, and first investigate the situation. Then. Augusta let out a cold sneer. Linley grew all the more cautious. Augusta's eyes flashed like lightning as he stared coldly at Linley. The illusory images surrounding his body suddenly spread out, forming into an enormous illusion of a golden titan that was 100 meters tall. The awe-inspiring aura of the titan caused even Linley to grow anxious. An innate divine ability? What sort of divine beast is Augusta? But he can't be, he has 182 children. Linley had never heard anyone say that Augusta was a divine beast. Bang! A golden blur shot out from Augusta's moth, shooting at high speed towards Linley. Linley focused his concentration and used his life Overgod sword to block. But when that golden, illusory light struck against Linley's life Overgod sword, bang! It disappeared. What? Linley was shocked. That weak. Just now, Judging from Augusta's attitude, Linley had thought that Augusta was preparing some supreme technique against him. He never imagined that this was just a fake technique. The attack power of that golden illusion probably wouldn't have been able to scratch Linley, even if it had hit him head-on. Clearly, it was just meant to make him nervous. Haha, Linley, you really are easy to fool. Augusta's wild laughter resonated in Linley's mind. I was tricked again. Linley's face changed. By now, Augusta had already moved 10,000 kilometers away. Swoosh. Linley instantly increased his speed to the limit, once more chasing at high speed. But within a short period of time, Linley understood something. The golden samsara body only allows him to strengthen his body, and make his material attacks slightly stronger. This is much like how my dragon form strengthens my own body. However, given that I am 10 times stronger than him, that increase in physical power isn't able to change the balance of power by much at all. Bang! The inky jade-fused power within Linley's body was wildly bursting forth. Linley, in dragon form, was constantly, ceaselessly closing the gap between himself and Augusta, as he continued to chase at full speed. Linley actually managed to increase in power by this much. That bit of power gained from the golden samsara body technique is completely useless against him. Although Augusta acted arrogant and brash, in his heart, he felt miserable. Glancing backwards, he saw Linley continue to chase after him, and he said to himself, Orloff, come quickly. Otherwise. The Celestial Realm. The Orloff Gardens. There were 8 sovereigns who lived within the Orloff Gardens. One of them was naturally the master of the Orloff Gardens, Orloff. Linley actually managed to increase in power by this much and drive Augusta to such a state. The white-haired, white-robed Orloff stood straight, his gaze cold and calm. If he's forced to his wits' end, given Augusta's temperament, he will definitely do it, and Wadred and the others will definitely be able to guess. I have no other choice. The white-robed elder, Orloff, waved his hand. Instantly, the entire Orloff Gardens began to rapidly shrink in size, then transformed into a blurry light that flew into Orloff's body. Lord Orloff. The servants in the garden, along with the other 7 sovereigns, all stared at him, puzzled. Why had Orloff taken away the Orloff Gardens? Orloff's face was heavy but calm. With a wave of his hand, he tore a rift in space in front of him, then immediately stepped into chaotic space. These 7 sovereigns were the 7 sovereigns who had chosen to serve Orloff. Manlu and Bort were amongst their number as well. Lord Orloff seems to be in a bad mood. Manlu said with a frown. In the past, no matter what difficulties Lord Orloff encountered, he would face them with a smile. Nothing was able to affect his temperament. But just now. A blue-haired, 3-eyed beauty said, also puzzled, what's more, Lord Orloff rarely takes the Orloff Gardens with him when he travels. Let's go. We'll go take a look as well. The Sovereign of Fire, Bort, waved his hand as well, also tearing a rift in space, then immediately took the lead in entering it. The other 6 puzzled sovereigns didn't hesitate, they immediately charged into chaotic space after him, all wanting to learn what had happened. But when they spread out their divine sense. What? The faces of the 7 sovereigns changed. Linley and Augusta, 2 chief sovereign-level experts, by the time they entered chaotic space, there were already more than 20 sovereigns watching this fight. No wonder Lord Orloff went over there. So it is because Augusta is in trouble. Those subordinate sovereigns all knew about the relationship between Orloff and Augusta. Let's go. Let's fly over there, but let's stay some distance away. Otherwise, if we are hit by any ripples of power, we might die from them. The 7 sovereigns also drew closer. Actually, many of the spectating sovereigns were drawing closer towards Linley and Augusta. Only, at the same time, they maintained a minimum distance of at least a few billion kilometers. At this distance, given a sovereign's reaction speed, they should be absolutely safe. Energy ripples couldn't possibly travel so far and still have enough power to injure a sovereign. Linley and Augusta were only a few hundred kilometers apart. To close from 10,000 kilometers to a few hundred, from this, one could tell the difference in speed between the two. 1,000 years ago, Linley's speed was already slightly faster than Augusta's. Because his power had increased tenfold when he fused the four profound mysteries together, although that was primarily in terms of attack power, and his speed hadn't increased by much, it had still increased by a bit. The profound mysteries of explosion did, after all, contain some aspects that would help one move more quickly. Augusta's body was transforming and his speed was increasing, but even so, he was still somewhat slower than Linley. Oh, Orloff came. Linley's divine sense easily located Orloff. Augusta discovered Orloff's arrival as well. Overjoyed, he hurriedly sent to Linley, "Linley, the news that you are chasing after and trying to kill me has already made its way to Lord Orloff. You should know, that after this planar war, Lord Orloff owes me yet another favor. If you dare attack me, Lord Orloff will definitely kill you. Humph, Augusta, save your strength. There's no point to you threatening me." Linley laughed coldly, and his speed increased once more as he pulled to within 200 kilometers. "Linley." A warm, gentle voice rang out. "Lord Orloff." Linley replied with great courtesy. Orloff was currently hurrying over from the celestial realm, while Linley and Augusta had just flown out from the divine light plane not long ago. The distance between the two planes was simply too fast. Even if Orloff flew over at maximum speed, he would most likely still need several minutes to arrive. For sovereigns, a single second was enough to exchange countless blows. Multiple minutes? That was enough for Linley and Augusta to finish their fight to the death. "Linley, Augusta is my good friend. No matter what sort of hatred you and Augusta bear each other, I would like to urge you, Linley, to temporarily let it rest." Orloff sent. "Impossible." Linley refused. "Give me some face. What do you say?" Orloff was still very calm. Although in the past, Linley felt goodwill towards Orloff, the current Linley couldn't help but feel a hint of anger towards him. In the past, when Augusta had deceived Linley and taken his 4 divine beasts' blood essences, the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, had been his accomplice. And now, Orloff was urging him to spare Augusta. "My apologies. Today, he must definitely die." Linley's attitude became even more unyielding. Linley and Augusta were now less than 100 kilometers apart. "Linley, can it be that you insist on killing him right in front of me?" The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, finally grew angry. His words became somewhat fierce as well. "I wanted to be friends with you, but if you insist on doing this, then in the future, I will have no choice but to kill you. I imagine that if I want to kill you, there's no one who can stop me." Linley's heart sank. Orloff was going to act? But in the next instant, he made his decision and planned out his retreat. "Linley, if you give up now, you and I will remain friends." Orloff sent. "Are you suggesting that we previously were friends?" Linley sneered. "If we were friends, why would you help Augusta deceive me? He said he would return free will to my mother, but that was a pure lie. I refuse to believe that you, the exalted chief sovereign of fate, wouldn't know about the secrets of restoring free will to an angel." Orloff let out a sigh. "Linley, so that's what you are so angry about. Originally, I was asking a favor from Augusta, so I had no choice." "Linley." Orloff's voice suddenly grew sharp. This was because, Linley was now less than 20 meters away from Augusta. "Kill." Linley showed no mercy at all, the life Overgod sword in his hands once more shot out. Crackle, the irresistibly sharp sword energy formed into a beam. In the face of that being, The fabric of reality in chaotic space was as weak as tissue paper. It was easily pierced through as the beam of sword energy landed on Augusta's body. The sword energy beam was simply too thick, the lightsaber was unable to completely block it. The beam of energy passed through Augusta's waist, actually bisecting Augusta in half as his waist was transformed into dust. Augusta's speed slowed, and Linley instantly arrived. "Orloff, I have no other choice." Augusta suddenly laughed loudly. And madness appeared in his eyes as he stared at Linley. "Linley, in countless years, no one has ever been able to force me to this state. I have no choice but to violate the pact between Orloff and myself. You shall die now." The deep, berserk voice echoed within Linley's mind. But Linley just laughed coldly in his heart. Augusta had tried this trick last time, to frighten him with a bluff. "What, you want to use the same tactic twice in a row?" Linley sent back. "I know exactly how strong you are now. Unless you truly have an innate divine ability or some other unique attacks, there is nothing you can do. Unfortunately, you do not." As he spoke, Linley once again lifted up his life Overgod sword. The bisected Augusta was no longer able to dodge as easily as he had in the past. Augusta's face was just cold and emotionless, and then, he let out a savage howl as he raised his head. Rumble, blurry, illusory images suddenly appeared. The phantom of a vermilion bird appeared from Augusta's head. His left side released the phantom of an azure dragon that was 3 meters long, while his right side released the phantom of the divine beast, White Tiger. Beneath his vanished waist lay the phantom of the divine beast, Black Tortoise. Augusta stared coldly at Linley. "Impossible!" Linley howled wildly in his heart. This technique, amazingly enough, was the supreme technique which the chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, had developed after researching the fused innate divine ability of the 4 divine beasts, space-time paradox. Wadred said that he only told the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, about his supreme technique, and that he had Orloff swear an Overgod oath that he would not teach it to anyone else. The chief sovereign of destruction couldn't possibly have taught it to Augusta. Then, a light went off in Linley's head. Linley stared in astonishment at Augusta, who was currently executing space-time paradox. Can it be him? Right at this moment, the surrounding space in chaotic space was already beginning to twist, distort, and change, thanks to this space-time paradox technique. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 42, Earth Fire Water Wind. Space-time paradox. No matter how calm and collected chief sovereign of destruction Wadred was, upon seeing this, his face completely changed. How can he know this technique? Orloff swore an oath by the Overgods. He couldn't possibly violate it. Wadred. What is going on? A clear voice rang out in his mind. It was the voice of the chief sovereign of death. As time had passed, given how quickly sovereigns were able to spread information to each other, more and more sovereigns had come to chaotic space. There were already more than 40 sovereigns who were watching this battle. "I don't know either." The chief sovereign of destruction was completely stunned. For the moment, he had no idea what was going on. "You said that Orloff couldn't possibly teach it to anyone else. What about you? Did you teach it to anyone else?" The chief sovereign of death said hurriedly. "How could I teach it to someone else?" The chief sovereign of destruction sent back frantically. "Then there are only 2 possibilities. The first is that Augusta developed it himself." The chief sovereign of death said. "Impossible. How long has he had his blood essences of the 4 divine beasts for? In addition, I was able to develop it because I long ago became a paragon in the edicts of destruction. And had a thorough understanding of the soul as well. Luck also played a major role. Augusta wasn't even able to become a paragon. Even if you gave him 1,000,000,000,000 years, it would be impossible for him to develop even a fragment of this technique." The chief sovereign of destruction was absolutely certain of this. Then the only possibility is the second one, even though I don't dare believe it. The chief sovereign of death's voice contained a hint of dread. The face of the chief sovereign of destruction changed as well. Are you saying that Orloff is? We'll know soon. However, Linley's in danger as well, now. The chief sovereign of death sent to him, rather worried. Even if we tried to save him, we wouldn't make it in time. The chief sovereign of destruction frowned. Augusta unleashed the technique already. Perhaps, because he has very few blood essences of the four divine beasts, the strength is inferior to mine, but, it isn't something which the likes of Linley can withstand. Linley doesn't have a soul-protecting Overgod artifact, after all. Linley was indeed in dire straits right now. More than 40 sovereigns were spread throughout chaotic space, watching. Through their divine sense, the sovereigns couldn't help but come to the same conclusion. Linley, this supreme expert who had, in 10,000 short years, suddenly risen to prominence and eclipsed the chief sovereigns of the laws, could it be that this brilliant, shining star was about to fall, after having released its last burst of light? When the phantoms of the four divine beasts appeared, a unique, invisible energy spread out in every direction. Within 10 million kilometers, all space came to a sudden halt. The constantly shattering and cracking space froze in mid-crack, while more than 90% of the invisible energy was fully unleashed on Linley. Compressing space-time, distorting it. The flow of time changes. Linley, when faced with this technique, suddenly had a familiar feeling. This. Linley's gaze began to blaze as he stared at the phantoms of the four divine beasts surrounding Augusta. Every single phantom was releasing a unique type of energy, and when combined together, they unleashed this full technique. The four unique types of energy actually were able to manipulate the universe to the point of affecting space and time. Isn't this, Linley's eyes instantly turned round. In this moment, time itself stood still. Even that ray of translucent light which shot out of Augusta's mouth seemed to have suddenly become very, very slow. Right? That's exactly it. All these years, Linley had always been in pursuit of completely fusing those four profound mysteries from different laws into a complete whole. However, although he was able to train to the bottleneck, the final step of completely, perfectly fusing the four laws was something Linley was still yet to be able to do. He wasn't able to overcome this threshold. But now, when sensing the unique, perfect fusion of those four types of energy, and how they manipulated the heavens, it was as though a master sculptor who had bitterly toiled in pursuit of perfection suddenly saw the sculpture of a grand master sculptor, and instantly gained enlightenment. This was the current Linley. The azure dragon was water attribute. Water was soft and gentle, capable of encompassing and absorbing everything. The black tortoise was earth attribute. The earth was vast, heavy, and ponderous. The white tiger was wind attribute. The wind was invisible and formless, appearing and disappearing without any pattern. The vermilion bird was fire attribute. Fire burned and blazed wildly, filled with violent fury which was unpredictable. This space-time paradox was actually the combination of earth, fire, water, and wind. When one was stuck at a bottleneck, one might spend 1 trillion years without breaking through. But it was also possible that one would break through after a few days. This required luck, required a sudden flash of insight. Last time, Linley was just watching the battle, and so he hadn't sensed too deeply into the technique. In addition, last time, he hadn't reached this bottleneck in the fusion of the four laws, and so naturally he hadn't gained any insights. But now, when facing this space-time paradox, Linley, who had been at a bottleneck for so long, benefited from those accumulated experiences. Everything had been prepared for this moment, and now, when the insight came, Linley suddenly understood. He understood. Everything was now clear to him. Although all of this took time to describe, in reality, everything occurred in a flash. This sudden enlightenment required only a fraction of an instant. Humph, die. Augusta laughed coldly as that translucent light reached Linley's body. Rumble. The world suddenly changed as the natural laws descended. Linley smiled as he looked at that translucent ray of light. He let out a gentle breath, and a translucent sword shadow emerged from his mouth. When it clashed against the translucent ray of light, it instantly shattered it into pieces. The remnants of the translucent sword of light turned small and thin. After flying for a bit longer, it vanished from the universe. Utter shock filled Augusta's eyes. Impossible. Swish. Linley's eyes shot out two translucent sword shadows. Given how fast his soul attack was, Augusta was completely unable to dodge, and the two translucent sword shadows sank into his body. However, Augusta was completely unharmed. His soul defense is actually this powerful. Linley couldn't help but exclaim in astonishment, while glancing at the surrounding area. 4 types of elemental essences were surrounding him. The natural laws had already descended, and were currently transforming his soul. If I hadn't personally experienced this space-time paradox technique, who knows how long it would have been before I would make this breakthrough. This breakthrough was even more difficult than becoming a paragon. Earth, fire, water, and wind, these 4 laws and their profound mysteries were completely different. To perfectly fuse them into a whole was simply too hard. But Linley had succeeded. Upon becoming a paragon, one would be bestowed with will as a reward. It was even more difficult for me to fuse these 4 laws together, and the technical power of the attack is 10 times greater than a paragon's. I imagine that the amount of will I shall receive should be greater as well. Linley could clearly sense that each of his souls was rising in power. Because Linley was a soul mutate, upon making his breakthrough, every single soul would evolve. Linley couldn't help but feel surprised. Linley's eyes were filled with wild joy. I actually gained a portion of will that was double what a paragon would gain. Although he had expected that the amount of will he would receive would be more than what paragons received, he hadn't expected that it would be double. This truly surprised Linley. Originally, when he had successfully become a soul mutate, although he had been bestowed will, it wasn't double that of a paragon's. Each increase of a full portion of will represented a 10-fold increase in power. Linley was able to break through the bottleneck and reach complete mastery. His power had thus increased 10-fold in terms of the profound mysteries. But upon receiving 2 portions of will as well, that meant that his power had instantly increased 1,000-fold. It must be understood that while at the bottleneck, Linley was already 10 times as powerful as the chief sovereign of light, Augusta. They were on completely different levels. They were several levels apart from each other. The difference between them was like that of the heavens and the earth. Linley actually blocked it, broke through it effortlessly. The chief sovereigns of death and destruction, along with the various other sovereigns, were all completely stunned. Just now, the natural laws descended. The chief sovereign of death suddenly said, "Are you saying?" The chief sovereign of destruction was stunned. Linley definitely made a major breakthrough. Otherwise, the laws couldn't possibly have descended for him. In addition, there is no way he could have risen in power by so much so quickly. I have a feeling that the current Linley is no weaker than us. The chief sovereign of death sent in a low voice. Indeed, in terms of power of will, as a 4-way soul mutate with 3 sovereign sparks and 2 portions of will gained from the perfect fusion of 4 laws, Linley was 10 times stronger than ordinary chief sovereigns. He was already comparable to those paragons amongst the chief sovereigns. On a technical level, with his fused profound mysteries, he was 10 times more powerful than a paragon. In terms of energy, his fused sovereign power was 100 times that of an ordinary sovereign's. His only flaw was that his Overgod weapon was not suited to him, and so he wasn't able to unleash much of its power. But despite that, Linley's power was already enough to make it so that he had no need to fear the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts at all. How can you, Augusta stared towards Linley in disbelief. Linley had instantly increased in power 1,000-fold. This increase in power gave Linley complete confidence in facing even the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff. Linley felt no fear at all now. Laughing, he looked at Augusta. "I'm quite curious. Why is it that your space-time paradox was so weak?" "It was far weaker than I expected. The fused innate divine abilities of the 4 divine beasts would allow one's power to increase more than 10,000 times, after all, for lesser sovereigns to be capable of exterminating chief sovereigns, one could imagine how mighty it was. The chief sovereign of destruction himself had said that when developing space-time paradox, although the power was far from the power unleashed by the 4 divine beasts, it was still 1,000 times greater than his own raw power. But Augusta... Whoosh! Augusta's figure flashed away, attempting to flee. Swoosh! Linley's figure flashed as well, and he instantly appeared in front of Augusta. With a casual swipe of his draconic tail, he lashed out with it, using it like a whip that struck viciously against Augusta's body, sending him flying far away. Blood splattered, but as a light shone over Augusta's body, his flesh and skin were completely healed. Your speed." Augusta was completely stupefied. The current Linley was on a completely different level from the former Linley. "I told you. You won't be able to flee." Linley laughed softly. "You haven't answered me yet. Why is it that your space-time paradox is so weak?" Augusta, having seen Linley's speed just now, no longer had any plans to flee. He let out a snicker. "Weak. The strength of this technique has to do with how much blood essences of the 4 divine beasts one has. Wadred used far more blood essences than I did, so the power of it was naturally greater." Linley laughed and nodded. "All right. It's about time. If I don't act now, Orloff will soon arrive." Hearing this, Augusta's face changed. Linley. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, who was currently hurrying through chaotic space towards them at high speed, said to Linley frantically, "Isn't it just a matter of letting your mother regain her free will? Fine. I will make Augusta release his spiritual bond with that angelic resurrection pool." "Orloff, you seem to be quite nervous." Linley sent back. "As far as I can recall, and in fact, as far as any sovereigns can recall, you, Orloff, as the chief sovereign of fate, always spend your time toiling away with research in your Orloff gardens in the celestial realm. You never get involved in worldly affairs. Nothing can disturb you. But now, you are nervous." "Naturally. He is my good friend." Orloff sent back. "Linley, I hope you won't act foolishly." "Just a good friend." Linley laughed as he sent back, and the chief sovereign of fate's face changed slightly. "Upon seeing Augusta execute space-time paradox, I realized the truth. You are bound by an Overgod oath. There is no way that you could have taught space-time paradox to someone else. But there is a loophole. If you and Augusta are the same person to begin with, then naturally any secrets you know, he knows." Linley let out a sigh. "Actually, if I hadn't accepted that emissary and learned of the existence of the Beulah race, I wouldn't have come to this realization so quickly. Actually, when I fought Augusta for the first time and realized that his power was 10 times what I had expected, I began to suspect that he might have other sovereign clones. Unfortunately, I never imagined, nor did I dare imagine, that you and him truly were the same person." The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Since you've already guessed it, you should know what to do. I do not wish, for you and I to become enemies." "Yes. I know what I should do." Linley smiled as he waved his hand. The life Overgod sword in his hand lashed out in a beautiful, dreamlike arc, and a finger-thick ray of inky jade light shot out. The only thing that appeared within the surrounding space was that finger-thick ray of inky jade light, and a finger-thick spatial tear. There weren't even any spatial ripples created. The energy was concentrated to an absolute peak. Linley's most powerful technique, sword intent. Slash. A hole appeared in Augusta's head. Augusta's mouth opened, but he was no longer capable of making any sounds. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 43. A New Name, Part 1. Augusta's body crumpled down, falling into the flows of chaotic space, being carried away like an inanimate object within the rivers. The chief sovereign of light, Augusta, was killed by one sword blow. Augusta died. Linley killed Augusta. The sovereigns couldn't help but take a deep breath. It had been countless years since a chief sovereign had truly perished. Good that he died. The chief sovereigns of death and destruction, along with 10 plus other sovereigns, had already guessed at the connection between Augusta and Orloff. They felt a surge of delight in their hearts. Bang! Bang! 2 rays of light shot out from Augusta's corpse, moving at extremely high speed. It was a ring and the lightsaber. Stay here. Linley wasn't able to catch them in time, so he could only use his fused sovereign power to create a distant barrier, wanting to trap these 2 Overgod artifacts within it. Do you think that the likes of you is capable of trapping my Overgod artifacts? Orloff's low voice rumbled within Linley's mind. In midair, the lightsaber suddenly expanded dramatically. With a boom, it pierced straight through that barrier. Linley only saw 2 bolts of light flash past, and then the 2 Overgod artifacts disappeared. Linley, seeing this, couldn't help but sigh to himself. The Overgod artifacts belonged to the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, to begin with. Under Orloff's control, given how quickly Overgod artifacts could move, they vastly outstripped any sovereign's speed. 10 billion kilometers away from Linley, within the void. A white-robed Orloff stretched his hand out, snatching the lightsaber that had flown towards him. This lightsaber was the Fate Overgod weapon. His other clone, Augusta, naturally wasn't able to unleash its full power. But in the hands of the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, its power increased dramatically. The ring slid onto Orloff's finger as well. Orloff was able to control his Overgod artifacts from a distance, and didn't need to bind them with blood before using them. He stared into the distance at the many spectating sovereigns, especially those who hadn't realized that Orloff and Augusta were the same person, and so were in a state of shock. No matter how foolish they might be, however, upon seeing this, they understood. Orloff and Augusta had been the same person. Ah, Augusta and Lord Orloff are actually the same person. Then, since Lord Orloff became a paragon long ago, he gained an additional portion of will. He gained another portion of will from winning 10 planar wars in a row. Having an additional sovereign clone would also transform the chief sovereign of fate's soul, granting him yet another portion of will. Although his sovereign clone has perished, the only thing Orloff lost was the portion of will which was infused in his sovereign spark. His already strengthened soul wouldn't lose the will he had already gained. Then Lord Orloff, all the sovereigns were completely stunned. Only now did everyone understand how terrifyingly strong Orloff was. A soul change was irreversible. Once one's souls were strengthened, one soul couldn't possibly weaken in power, just because the other one was destroyed. Thus, Augusta's death didn't actually have much of an impact on the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff. It only represented that Orloff had lost a life. So in reality, he had 2 more portions of will than I did. No wonder he was able to withstand my Overgod weapon with his bare hands. The chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, had a look on his face that was as calm as still water. He quietly watched everything happen. All of the sovereigns watched and waited to see how the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, would take revenge upon Linley. Whoosh! The chief sovereign of fate's speed increased to the limit, passing through a distance of countless kilometers. Less than a minute later, he had traversed the distance of 100 billion kilometers and arrived within Linley's field of vision. Linley heft his life Overgod sword in his hand, standing there in the void, surrounded by chaotic space. You are really quite fast, Linley actually was able to laugh while nodding in praise. And you are really quite audacious. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, smiled as he looked at Linley. It seems that you are quite confident. But I, too, feel as though you are quite confident. Linley laughed calmly. Do you think that just by relying on that Overgod weapon, you will be able to kill me? Oh, I forgot, you are a Beulah. You are able to divide your consciousness in two, and you have spent countless years researching like a madman. I imagine you have a supreme technique of your own. Hearing Linley's words, a smile appeared on Orloff's face. I am very fortunate and should celebrate the fact that I am a Beulah, because in terms of my physical defense alone, I am inferior to the 4 divine beasts, the sable Leviathan, and those other supreme divine beasts. My Beulah race, however, has unlimited potential. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, had an indescribable look in his eyes. Temperament determines one's destiny. Due to many contradictory thoughts, many geniuses end up limiting themselves. But me? I'm able to give up all of the contradictory, complicated thoughts that hinder me. All my evilness, my avarice, I can shunt them all aside, leaving behind only what I need. Linley laughed calmly. Thus, we end up with a wild, overbearing, avaricious Augusta, as well as the supreme expert, Orloff, who focuses on his research and pays no mind to worldly affairs. Right. Orloff nodded and laughed. To tell the truth, we Beulahs aren't that gifted, innately. Originally, as a paragon, I did have a sovereign clone, but in terms of power, I wasn't confident in being able to defeat the other chief sovereigns of the edicts. Thus, I had to hide my power and ensure that they wouldn't fear me. If the 3 of them were to join forces against me, I would definitely lose. Thus, I couldn't let them know that Augusta and I were one and the same. And so, I naturally ended up having 182 children. In reality, those children were newborn infants with some excellent talents who I selected from the various material planes. After they grew up, they naturally would have no recollection of what happened when they were 1 or 2 years old. Augusta trained them, and so they naturally would believe that Augusta was their father. And thus, there was the Augusta clan. Who, then, would suspect that Augusta and I were one? Orloff laughed softly. In the past, you were extremely cautious. But now, it seems, you have no more concerns. Linley laughed calmly. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, smiled and nodded. To tell the truth, I now hold the other 3 chief sovereigns of the edicts in no regard whatsoever. This is because, all these years, I've never before revealed all of my power. You were able to destroy one of my clones, you are quite formidable. In order to show my respect for you, today, I will reveal my entire power. Although you will die, I will allow you to die satisfied. Linley frowned slightly. For Orloff to laugh and speak in such a manner indicated that his self-confidence was extremely high. Kill me? Augusta also said that he would kill me, but in the end, I killed him. Linley smiled, but then, suddenly, crackle, the life Overgod sword in Linley's hand instantly transformed into a ray of green light. An extremely concentrated line of inky jade light, the size of a finger, shot out through the void, chopping through it like a knife and leaving behind only an extremely fine spatial tear which not even divine sense could see clearly. Linley's life Overgod sword stabbed directly towards the body of Orloff, the chief sovereign of fate. His most powerful sword attack, sword intent. After completely fusing all 4 profound mysteries, Linley's power had risen 1,000-fold. He was now completely terrifying, and one could imagine how strong was the power which the sword attack contained. Clang. A ringing sound. Orloff just smiled as he looked at Linley, not even using his own fate Overgod sword to block, allowing Linley to stab him with his sword. What? Linley's face changed dramatically. Impossible. The distant spectators, including the chief sovereigns of death and destruction, all couldn't refrain from crying out in shock. They could tell how terrifyingly strong Linley's sword was. Logically speaking, no one should be able to rely on their body to defend against it. Not even chief sovereigns. Haha, Orloff couldn't help but start to laugh. After the creation of the universe, Linley, there have been a total of 7 Overgod missions. The other 3 chief sovereigns of the edicts and yourself, Linley, each acquired an Overgod artifact. But that just accounts for 4 completed missions. To the outside world, I have only admitted that I was in possession of a soul-protecting Overgod artifact, while Augusta acquired an Overgod weapon. But what about the last Overgod mission? Who completed it? Do you know, Linley? Orloff was quite smug. Linley's heart clenched. Can it also have been me? The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, laughed. This Overgod artifact is a defensive Overgod artifact. As he spoke, a completely black armor appeared on Orloff's body. This defensive Overgod artifact had already become one with Orloff's skin. Linley's heart was now ice cold. The distant, spectating sovereigns were all completely silent as well. Good heavens! Orloff was a complete monster. He had a soul-protecting Overgod artifact, a defensive Overgod artifact, and an Overgod weapon. He had 3 Overgod artifacts. He could probably stand there and do nothing, and the others still wouldn't be able to kill him. Orloff, the chief sovereigns of destruction, death, and life no longer had any desire to struggle against him. The 3 Overgod artifacts guaranteed that anyone, no matter how self-confident they were, would feel their morale plummet into the depths of the sea. Normally, I'll just allow this defensive Overgod artifact to be transformed into the appearance of the Orloff Gardens. I've bound it long ago, and under my control, it doesn't emanate any aura at all. Although many people are curious about my levitating gardens and can sense that it is extraordinary, no one knew that it was actually my transformed defensive Overgod artifact. Orloff laughed. The Orloff Gardens was actually a defensive Overgod artifact. Orloff seemed to be in an exceptionally good mood. He even publicized such an important secret. What, after hiding for so many years, have you decided to reveal everything today? Linley was 1,000,000 kilometers away from Orloff, but very cautious. These two stood at the peak of power amongst sovereigns. They stood there, within the flows of chaotic energy at a distance of 1,000,000 kilometers, speaking to each other in voices that rang like thunder. Haha, I no longer need to conceal anything. Orloff laughed. As for why that's the case, you will soon know. Orloff didn't seem to be grief-struck over the loss of his sovereign clone at all. Instead, he seemed to be smug and proud. Oh! Linley chuckled. Swoosh! Linley immediately transformed into a stream of light, fleeing at high speed into the distance. What horrible luck! Orloff actually has 3 Overgod artifacts. And he is no weaker than me to begin with. Even if he was weaker than me, with 3 Overgod artifacts in hand, there's no way I can actually defeat him. I didn't imagine that I would encounter this sort of a monster immediately after breaking through. Linley's heart was filled with utter resignation. Fleeing. Orloff also transformed into a ray of light, pursuing at full strength. In terms of pure will, the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, had 3 more portions than ordinary chief sovereigns did. As for Linley, he only had a single additional portion of will more than a chief sovereign. However, Linley had his fused sovereign power. It could be said that in pure, raw strength, the two were roughly on par. However, speed was not Linley's forte. As for Orloff, however, he had spent countless years analyzing and strengthening himself. It could be said that he had reached the limits in defense, attack, and speed. When chasing after Linley, Orloff clearly was somewhat faster than him. So fast. This speed is inconceivable. The spectating sovereigns in chaotic space were completely stupefied now. Linley and Orloff, in terms of speed, outstripped all of the other sovereigns now. Linley is actually as powerful as this. The chief sovereign of destruction let out a sigh. As for the violet-robed chief sovereign of death, who had flown to his side, she sighed as well. Linley is strong, but this Orloff, he hid himself far too well. Now that he has revealed his strength, we are no longer qualified to challenge him for supremacy. The chief sovereign of destruction nodded helplessly as well. 3 Overgod artifacts. Who would dare fight against Orloff? Some were feeling shocked, while others were feeling delighted. The sovereigns who had chosen to serve Orloff were naturally feeling delighted. Haha, so Lord Orloff was as powerful as this. Without question, Lord Orloff is undefeatable amongst sovereigns. A man with 2 black horns and long hair couldn't help but laugh. Everyone, Lord Orloff is about to kill that kid Linley. Oh, Linley's already fled into the life realm. Let's chase after them and continue to watch. The Sovereign of Fire, Bort, said with a laugh. Instantly, these words drew a reaction from quite a few of the surrounding sovereigns. Everyone already considered Linley to be a dead man. He was powerful, and most likely even more powerful than the other 3 chief sovereigns of the edicts. But the one chasing after Linley was Orloff. The unfathomable Orloff, who had 3 Overgod artifacts. Swoosh! Swoosh! Within chaotic space, many sovereigns began to fly at high speed towards the life realm. Within the life realm, Linley was fleeing at high speed, while the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, was pulling closer and closer to Linley. Although they had started at a distance of 1,000,000 kilometers, Orloff had managed to catch up, thanks to his greater speed. Not good. That technique again. Linley's face suddenly changed. The two were now only 10 kilometers apart, and right at this moment, a powerful aura washed over him. Linley's fused divine sense could easily sense that phantoms of the azure dragon, white tiger, black tortoise, and vermilion bird had appeared around Orloff's head, feet, and sides. Space within countless kilometers completely froze. On the ground below them, various experts who were either training or fighting were also completely paralyzed by this space-time compression. All of them were completely shocked, but unable to move. Swish! A translucent light shot out from Orloff's mouth towards Linley. Space-time paradox. Linley turned his head, opening his own mouth. Similarly, he shot out 2 rays of translucent sword shadows from his mouth. This was Linley's most powerful soul attack. The translucent ray of light and the translucent sword shadows collided. The first translucent sword shadow trembled, then immediately collapsed, but the translucent ray of light shrank in size as well. It then collided with the second sword shadow head-on, and with a bang, the second sword shadow also vanished. The remaining, greatly weakened translucent ray of light was dissipated by Linley's spiritual energy as soon as it entered his body. Admirable! You actually were able to block this technique. Orloff's voice rang out in Linley's mind. The power you put into this technique is much lower than when Wadrid used it. Linley sent back. In terms of raw power from the profound mysteries, Linley's soul attacks and material attacks were 10 times mightier than a paragon's. As for this space-time paradox of Orloff's, it was only a few dozen times stronger than a paragon's, and just a few times stronger than Linley's attack. It wasn't able to kill Linley. Haha. That's because both Augusta and myself each only refined and fused with a single drop of the blood essences of the 4 divine beasts. Orloff laughed. 1 drop? Linley was puzzled. He had handed over 11 drops of the azure dragon blood essence, and somewhat more of the other 3 types of blood essence. Why, then, had Orloff and Augusta used only 1 drop of each? However, Linley didn't have any time to consider this. He's catching up. This time, Orloff didn't use a soul attack, instead, he struck out with his fate Overgod sword, wanting to engage Linley in close combat. Linley gritted his teeth, then charged back at Orloff. The two were only a few hundred meters away from each other. Given how fast sovereigns moved, how little time would they need to cross such a distance? But Orloff was a supreme expert amongst chief sovereigns, his reaction speed was incredibly fast as well. Only, Linley had actively taken the initiative and had been preparing for it this entire time. And thus he immediately unleashed his sword-intent attack. The Infernal Realm. Blood Ridge Continent. Blue fire, how are things? Beirut sent mentally. Far away in the Infernal Realm, a figure entered through a spatial rift. It was Bluefire who had arrived in the Infernal Realm. Previously, when the sovereigns had begun to spread word amongst themselves that Linley and Augusta were engaging in battle in chaotic space, Beirut had felt uneasy, and so he had arranged for Bluefire to go watch in chaotic space. Beirut, Linley killed Augusta. Bluefire said hurriedly. Truly? That's wonderful. Beirut was overjoyed. What's wrong with you? Why are you looking like that? But, Bluefire's face grew ugly to behold. Augusta and Orloff are actually the same person. Orloff, Bluefire carefully began to describe everything, and as he did so, Beirut's face turned ugly to behold as well. By the end, his entire body was beginning to quiver. It's me who has harmed Linley. Beirut growled. What should we do now? Bluefire hurriedly asked. What can we do? Beirut let out a sigh. I have no idea how I'm supposed to let Bibi and the others know about this. Right at this moment, Beirut suddenly frowned. Eh? Why are they back? Bluefire, Linley's father, Hogg, and his mother, Lena, have already arrived at the Blood Ridge Continent's teleportation array. Immediately go and arrange for them to be escorted here. Linley, we aren't able to help him, but we must protect his family and friends. Right. Bluefire noticed Linley's father and mother through divine sense as well. Hogg and his wife, Lena, were currently advancing towards the Skirite Mountains at full speed. I know everything. I remember everything. Lena's eyes were filled with worry. My child, Linley, could it be that he went to go kill the chief sovereign of light? Nothing will happen to Linley, will it? In the very instant Linley killed Augusta, the angels from the angelic resurrection pool which Augusta controlled all instantly gained their freedom. Lena remembered everything that happened back at the Yulon plain, and also everything which had happened after she had been transformed into an angel. She immediately remembered her son, Linley, whom she had carried for 10 months, as well as Wharton. Only now did she truly begin to worry for Linley. Whoosh! Bluefire instantly appeared before them. Bluefire! Hogg and Lena immediately recognized him. Bluefire, what's happened to my child, Linley? Lena immediately asked with worry. In the past, although she had met Linley, at that time, she was still under control. She felt no emotion for Linley whatsoever. Only now was she truly Linley's mother. Bluefire had an ugly look on his face. He let out a sigh. Come with me. Sovereign power swept up Hogg and Lena, who immediately transformed into streaks of red light, disappearing into the horizon and soon arriving at the Skirite Mountains. Beirut, seeing them come, went to welcome them and Bluefire. I'm not sure what's going with Linley right now. Soon, I'll discuss it with you too. Beirut looked at Hogg and Lena as he spoke. For now, Beirut didn't want to reveal that Linley was fighting for his life. Hogg and Lena exchanged glances, concern in their eyes. Bang! Suddenly, a surge of powerful ground ripples swept towards them. Bluefire and Beirut simultaneously turned their heads to stare towards the south, towards the chaotic sea. Linley. Orloff. Beirut and Bluefire were both shocked. Linley and Orloff were currently wildly battling each other. They had battled all the way out of from the life realm, then passed into one of the other nearby higher realms, the infernal realm. They now appeared in the southern margins, in the skies of the endless, infinite chaotic sea. Almost immediately afterwards, many sovereigns tore holes through reality and arrived in the infernal realm. The sovereigns were all watching this unprecedented, spectacular battle. Only, everyone maintained a great distance from Linley and Orloff, because as all the spectators knew, even the other three chief sovereigns of the edicts, to say nothing of the ordinary chief sovereigns, might lose their lives in the face of this battle between Linley and Orloff. Bang! Bang! The surrounding fabric of reality repeatedly collapsed. The countless experts of the chaotic sea had long ago hidden themselves deep into the bottom of the sea, but the vibrations that transmitted all the way to the bottom still stunned them. How terrifyingly powerful was this energy! Haha, Orloff, I thought you were very powerful, but now, it seems, your attack power is only average. To kill me? It's far from being enough. Linley's voice echoed in the skies. Linley, your attack and your profound mysteries are indeed extremely powerful. Admirable, truly. If your Overgod artifact matched you, I probably truly would find it hard to kill you. The chief sovereign of fate's voice rang out as well. Linley and Orloff were deep within the chaotic sea, staring at each other from a distance of 10,000 kilometers. Although they were far apart, the terrifying aura each radiated was something they could sense, even without using divine sense. Kill me? How are you going to kill me? Linley snickered. Linley's body was covered with a flowing layer of inky jade light. His bloody wounds were repeatedly, ceaselessly healing. In terms of will and sovereign power, Linley and Orloff were evenly matched, but in terms of profound mysteries, Linley was on a higher level than Orloff, while Orloff's Overgod weapon was utilized at a higher level than Linley. This made it so that, in terms of raw material attack power, Linley and Orloff were actually on par with each other. However, Orloff had a defensive Overgod artifact. He could ignore his own defense and focus on attacking. As for Linley, he had to carefully defend. Naturally, this made it so that Linley was at a disadvantage. Still, Linley wouldn't lose his life as a result. After all, the difference in power between the two wasn't that great. The many sovereigns all watched nervously. By now, they all realized that amongst the chief sovereigns, Linley and Orloff were the two strongest. But Orloff had 3 Overgod artifacts, he could be said to be unbeatable, and so, in the eyes of the many sovereigns, this duel of the two most powerful experts ever created would result in Linley's fall. Quite a few sovereigns felt grief for Linley, in fact. 10,000 years, for him to reach these heights means that Linley can be described as an absolute marvel. Someone like him, what a pity. He's going to die. Even though Linley is going to die, the countless planes of the universe will never, ever forget him. After all, he is the only person qualified to battle Orloff, a supreme sovereign without peer. The various sovereigns chatted amongst themselves, many feeling grief for Linley. And yet, at the same time, they also felt admiration for Linley in their hearts. Generally speaking, when facing a man who was about to die, others would forget about their flaws and feel no jealousy, and so, quite naturally, most of them felt sympathy for Linley. Still, they continued to watch as Linley was driven towards death, one step at a time. Haha, Linley. The voice of Orloff once more rang out in the skies above the chaotic sea. A confident smile was on his face. It has been a long time since I've had such an enjoyable battle. Linley, just now, I was so happy when fighting you. I truly am not willing to let you just die, but I don't want to let you live either. Weren't you puzzled as to why I am no longer hiding my secrets? The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, laughed. Linley turned to look at Orloff, nodding slightly. Why? That is because, not long ago, or to be precise, during the last planar war, when I saw the Samsara battle formation your 6 emissaries activated, I had a flash of insight. Afterwards, I spent a few decades and finally completed my previously flawed, unperfect supreme technique. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, smiled. Supreme technique. Linley frowned. At this point in time, Orloff actually reached out to speak privately to him through divine sense. Yes, supreme technique. Over the course of the countless eons, I didn't actually spend much time developing my golden samsara body technique. My time was actually spent in developing the supreme attack, the greatest of all material attacks, samsara transcendence. Samsara transcendence. Linley was secretly shocked. Orloff sighed through divine sense. Linley, you will definitely die, so I wish to tell you some secrets that I discovered. Long ago, I discovered that the countless planes of the universe operated in far too orderly a manner. Who created the teleportation arrays? The Overgods. The Overgods are nothing more than the manifestations of the edicts. Why, then, would they do such a thing? In addition, why would there be planar wars? The goal of the planar wars clearly is to reduce the number of experts, so as to ensure that the number of experts within the planes would be balanced. All these various established mechanisms brought a sense to me. A sense that the countless planes of the universe were being guided by an invisible hand. Orloff said. Linley was stunned. Orloff's words were very reasonable. It did indeed seem as though an invisible hand was governing the countless planes. I want to break free from this regulation. Break free from this control. Orloff's gaze was sharp. Countless years ago, my goal was to surpass the other sovereigns. Now, I am invincible, and so my goal is to develop the most powerful material attack, to shatter the universe itself. I will make it so that neither the heavens nor the earth can stop me, can bind me. I will surpass and transcend the samsara, this cycle of the universe. Linley's heart was quivering as he listened. Countless years of research. I've analyzed countless races and discovered quite a few secrets. Orloff's smile was filled with delight. He didn't want to tell the other sovereigns about this matters. But as for Linley, as he saw it, Linley was going to die. And so, he would finally speak to Linley these words that he had hidden within his heart for so many years. The universe is filled with space. Thus, I paid particular attention to some innate divine abilities that were linked with space. As I saw it, if I were able to develop an attack that could break through and shatter space itself, what would happen? Would the universe collapse? Or would I reach a different universe? I don't know, but I am eager to find out. This technique, samsara transcendence, remained unperfect, despite countless years of research. Still, I absorbed much experience and constantly improved my own power. And yet, I still felt that something was off. Afterwards, when I learned space-time paradox from Wadrid, I realized where the problem lay, and so when you gifted me with the blood essences of the 4 divine beasts, I spent most of them in research. Linley finally realized why Augusta and Orloff had each used only a single drop of the many drops of 4 divine beasts' blood essences which Linley had provided. Despite that, however, the samsara transcendence technique remained rough and disharmonious. But when I saw the samsara battle formation the emissary under your command had developed, I suddenly understood. A magical formation, this technique of mine could be merged with a magical formation and thus be set up even more perfectly. Orloff's face was filled with a smile of self-delight. I finally succeeded. I personally believe this samsara transcendence attack of mine to be at the peak of what is possible. In terms of power, it is definitely superior to space-time paradox. Linley, to show my respect for you, I will permit you to die under this technique. Experience for yourself, my samsara transcendence. Orloff's face began to glow with an almost holy light. He appeared almost like one of those holy figures amongst mortals as he raised his fate Overgod sword. Rumble. 4 sword illusions suddenly appeared around Orloff. One was jade green, one was earthen yellow, one was fiery red, and one was light blue. The four sword illusions swirled around Orloff at high speed, and instantly, rumble. The universe began to change. It darkened. All of the spectating sovereigns were completely stupefied. What sort of terrifying power was this? This technique, Samsara Transcendence, was the most terrifying technique Orloff had developed, after spending countless years drawing from and analyzing the best parts of various other techniques and powers. I only have one chance. Just as Orloff began to unleash his technique, Linley reacted. And what he did was swoosh. Linley frantically fled into the distance. And as he did, the four sword illusions swirling around the Fate Overgod sword formed into a gigantic illusory sword that was more than 100 meters long. The sword chopped out. Crackle, a terrifying spatial chasm appeared in front of it, stretching off into infinity. It created spatial vibrations for countless kilometers around, causing the deaths of countless living creatures within the chaotic sea. This illusory sword that contained four types of sword illusions almost instantly arrived in front of Linley. When his opponent had launched this attack, Linley actually separated his body into three: a dragon-formed Linley, the water-type sovereign clone, and the wind-type sovereign clone. Harg! The dragon-formed Linley let out a low growl. Wielding the life Overgod sword in his hands, he swung savagely against the sword illusion. Bang! Linley felt as though a mountain was crushing down upon him. In almost an instant, the two hands which Linley was using to wield his life Overgod sword completely shattered. His bones split apart, and blood flowed everywhere. The life Overgod sword trembled, then slipped out of his hands, with the edge of it being knocked backwards and slicing through Linley's chest, as easily as slicing tissue. With a slash sound, Linley's chest was completely chopped open, from shoulder to waist. Linley's bisected body flashed, and he instantly exchanged it with his Earth-type sovereign clone. The life Overgod sword, due to having been used to block that sword illusion, was actually knocked far into the distance, flying away like a meteor. How terrifying! Everyone was completely awestruck. The three Linleys were currently fleeing into the distance, but the strange thing was, Linley wasn't actually in pursuit of his life Overgod sword. The life Overgod sword is indeed quite resilient. By relying on it to block, he was actually able to save his life. However, there will not be a next time. Orloff chased after Linley at high speed, also preparing to unleash his supreme technique yet again. The chief sovereigns and the ordinary sovereigns were all filled with terror. This included Beirut and Bluefire, who were closest to him. Too powerful. Linley, thinking back to that scene, thought to himself. The attack power was so strong, it actually shattered the draconic scales on my hand and broke my bones, knocking the life Overgod sword onto my body and then sending it flying far into the distance. It must be understood that Linley's body, especially when infused with his will and when filled with his fused sovereign power, was far more powerful than most sovereign artifacts. And yet, despite that, he had still suffered such a fate. That technique, Samsara Transcendence, it was simply too powerful. The fruits of his countless years of research is indeed powerful. Linley's gaze was locked onto a distant figure, the Sovereign of Fire, Bord. Bord was currently alongside the other sovereigns who served the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff. Lord Orloff is too powerful. That technique is absolutely invincible. The man with two black horns said with a laugh. Haha, Linley was actually able to stay alive. However, his life Overgod sword was knocked flying. What is he going to use to block the next attack? Bord laughed disdainfully. He was rather envious of Linley to begin with, and last time, Linley had barked at him. This made it so that Bord had a very negative impression of Linley. Naturally, he hoped that Orloff would kill Linley. Everyone, Linley is flying over towards us. Quick, step aside. The sovereigns all hurriedly moved away, but they weren't in too much of a rush. After all, they believed that Linley was simply fleeing, and just so happened to flee towards their direction. But the strange thing was, swish! As the sovereigns flew away, Linley suddenly changed directions as well. Linley's speed was more than 100 times greater than those lesser sovereigns, and he instantly appeared before them. What? Bort's face changed dramatically. Bang! Linley's fist smashed onto Bort's head. A weak little lesser sovereign of fire, in front of Linley, wasn't able to fight back at all. Fire-type sovereign spark. In virtually the same instant as he struck out, Linley sent a drop of his blood into that lesser sovereign spark. His gaze was sharp. By now, I have no other options. Only by fusing with his fire-type sovereign spark will I be able to rise in power yet again. Linley had no other choices. He didn't want to die. Once he died, Beirut, Blue Fire, and even the 4 Divine Beasts clan and Linley's family members, who knew what would happen to them. Thus, Linley had to act. There were quite a few sovereigns of fire present, but the only one Linley felt antipathy towards was Bort. Thus, without hesitating at all, he chose that poor bastard. Rumble. The world began to change yet again. Countless amounts of fire elemental essences swirled about in midair as the fire-type sovereign spark entered the divine fire clone in Linley's body. It only took an instant to refine a sovereign spark, and so Linley's souls once more began to transform, and will once more flooded his soul. Aside from this, 4 types of sovereign power, fuse. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 44, A New Name, Part 2. Within Linley's body, 4 types of sovereign power instantly began to bubble and froth. Linley, by fusing with a lesser sovereign spark of fire, you'll just gain a bit more will. Without an Overgod artifact, there is no way you are capable of withstanding my blow. The chief sovereign of fate's body once more was surrounded by those 4 illusory swords, which began to rotate around him. But Linley only closed his eyes, the muscles on his face twitching slightly. These 4 types of sovereign power. In the past, the uniqueness of the fusion of 4 types of divine power made Linley feel certain, that upon fusing 4 types of sovereign power, there would definitely be a unique product as well. But the uniqueness of it completely surpassed Linley's imagination. Crackle, after the 4 types of sovereign power fused, they instantly transformed into a unique, gray, foggy sort of energy. This gray energy wildly filled every inch of Linley's body. His bones, his skin, his blood vessels, his organs, even his mind and his soul. Linley's flesh was trembling. His entire body was twitching. Crackle, it transformed his muscles, his bones, and every tiny, minute part of him. Earth-shaking changes were occurring in his body, and in virtually every second, Linley's body would be strengthened hundreds of times. He was constantly rising in power and gaining in strength. In front of the gray energy created by the 4 types of fused sovereign power, Linley's body seemed to respond by simply growing stronger, stronger, stronger. Careful, Linley. Beirut's voice rang out in Linley's mind. Linley opened his eyes. Swish. That fate Overgod sword, flowing with 4 types of colors, had already arrived in front of Linley. Slash. Linley's clothes shattered, and on Linley's chest, the fate Overgod sword left behind a single bloody scratch. What? The eyes of the chief sovereign of fate and the others all widened. How can this be? The sovereigns who were spectating this battle were completely stupefied. The unsurpassed supreme technique of Orloff, Samsara Transcendence, in front of Linley was only able to just barely scrape open Linley's skin. Crackle, that bloody scratch instantly healed, while at the same time, Linley's body continued to strengthen. His bones, his muscles, every component of his insides was constantly shattering and reforming, rising in power time and time again. Each rise in power was terrifyingly great, and yet, they seemed to happen without end. Large amounts of grey energy were being used up by Linley's body. I've researched for countless years to develop this, my most powerful sword attack. How can it be that I'm not even able to pierce into his skin? Impossible, impossible. Orlov couldn't help but begin to bellow. He actually swept out with his fate Overgod sword to attack Linley yet again, and the quad-colored sword illusions once more manifested, resulting into that terrifying sword. Slash. The Overgod sword once more slashed out onto Linley's body. But this time, it didn't even break his skin. Orlov and the others all stared at Linley, stunned. Rumble, the space around Linley trembled violently, unleashing a wave of energy that actually knocked Orlov flying away. As for Linley, he stood there silently in the center of that wave of energy, his eyes closed, like an invincible divinity of war. Inconceivable. Inconceivable. Linley, after receiving that blow from his enemy, completely focused on his self-transformation. His body was undergoing a heaven-shaking evolution. Linley had expected this, but he had never imagined that his sovereign sparks would actually melt. Right. They melted, as though they were ice cubes. The sovereign sparks were indestructibly tough, and none had ever been destroyed despite the passage of countless years. But they were actually beginning to melt. Surrounded by that grey energy, Linley's 4 fused sovereign sparks actually began to melt. The 4 sword-shaped souls that were within the sovereign sparks were revealed, and the 4 sword-shaped souls, as well as the sword-shaped soul of the main body, also began to transform after becoming submerged into that grey energy. It was as though they were breaking free from a cocoon and becoming a butterfly. Slowly, the 5 hovering sword-shaped souls actually fused together, merging like flowing liquids, then finally transforming into a single sword-shaped soul. This sword-shaped soul began to change in color. First, it was azure, then it was earthen yellow, next, it became jade, afterwards, it became red, and in the end, it became completely translucent. A virtually invisible, translucent, sword-shaped soul. Bang! Linley's 4 sovereign clones, bereft of both sovereign sparks and souls, completely collapsed. Only one body was now remaining, and a single, translucent sword-shaped soul. This transformation had used up a great deal of that grey energy. Completely inconceivable. Although his souls had merged together and he had even lost his sovereign spark, Linley could clearly sense the existences of all 4 elemental seas. He could effortlessly pull 4 types of sovereign power from them, and not just that, Linley could even sense the elemental sea of light, the elemental sea of darkness, and all the other planes that served as well springs for power. Linley, with but a thought, could summon every type of sovereign power. My power of will is gone. Linley discovered that after his sovereign sparks were consumed and his souls were transformed into one, his original will had vanished. Only, Linley sensed a unique sort of control over the surrounding space. This feeling of control was like, this part of the world was his own domain. He didn't need will. He didn't need anything else. He could simply use the power of the world to constrict any enemies and kill them all. Impossible. Orlov, who had always been invincible, seemed to have gone berserk. He was repeatedly using his Overgod weapon to strike towards Linley, but the energy wave emanating from Linley's body forced him to stay far away, and he was unable to draw near. All of the sovereigns watching this were rendered completely speechless. What had happened just now had completely surpassed their expectations. The power which Linley had revealed surpassed the realm of sovereigns. Has he become an Overgod? The chief sovereign of death murmured. The nearby chief sovereign of destruction's chin rose, and he blinked repeatedly. Can it be that living creatures can actually train to the Overgod level? Haha. Wonderful. Bluefire and Beirut, within the Skirite Mountains, watched as Orlov attacked like a madman, but wasn't even able to get close to Linley. They couldn't help but feel wildly overjoyed. "Are you done?" A calm, quiet voice rang out. Linley, surrounded by that energy wave, opened his eyes and looked at Orloff, who stood before him. In this moment, Linley seemed like a sword. After his soul had transformed, a sword intent seemed to burst out from him. Just looking at Linley made their hearts quiver. The chief sovereign of fate violently swung out his hand with his fate Overgod sword, only to realize, he couldn't move. Because Linley's right hand had clutched onto the fate Overgod sword. This Overgod sword, Linley let out a sigh. He suddenly had a strange feeling, as though this Overgod sword wasn't all that tough. Linley's right hand applied just a bit of pressure. Crack. A clear, ringing sound. What it represented, was that the exalted, incomparable Overgod artifact had actually been snapped by Linley in half. How ordinary. Linley tossed it aside casually, and the half of the Overgod sword in his hands fell from the skies, landing into the seas below. Plunk. It sank into the seas. All of the spectating sovereigns were once more rendered speechless. Even the chief sovereign of fate stared, stunned, at the remaining half of the Overgod sword which he held. This, how can this, as soon as his words rang out. Swish. Orloff's body suddenly transformed into a streak of light, as he fled into the distance at high speed. Even now, Orloff still held a faint hope that he could stay alive. His homeland was a material plane, and he wanted to flee into it. Orloff was going to continue his research, until the day came when he surpassed Linley. He felt that although Linley's attack power had increased, his speed hadn't necessarily increased. Unfortunately. You want to flee? Linley's body flashed, and he actually traversed countless kilometers in a single instant, arriving before Orloff. His speed was countless times faster than Orloff. The resolute, unyielding look in Orloff's eyes turned dim. I lost. Completely lost. He understood that Linley, who was able to easily break apart the fate Overgod sword, definitely would also be able to easily breach his defensive Overgod armor. The eyes of the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, suddenly lit up again, and he stared at Linley. Linley, I hope that you will use your most powerful attack to kill me. Although they were enemies, Linley still felt a hint of admiration for Orloff. Admiration for how insane he was. Fine, then. I will use my most powerful attack to kill you. Linley pressed two fingers together, forming a sword with them. A blurry gray sword that was around 1.5 meters in length slowly emerged. As soon as this illusion of a blurry gray sword emerged, the surrounding space began to tremble and fracture into countless pieces. Orloff stared intently at the illusory sword, his attention focused. Whoosh! The sword pierced through the air. Linley's most powerful sword attack was finally unleashed, his sword intent, fused with 4 types of power. Bang! A terrifying explosion rang out. An unprecedented explosion. Linley's sword seemed to have created a terrifying change in the world. An enormous, terrifying black hole that was nearly 10,000 kilometers in circumference appeared before Linley. Countless amounts of dense gray energy emerged from this hole, pouring into the infernal realm and spreading out towards every direction. Not good. This gray energy spread out so quickly that in virtually an instant, it traversed countless millions of kilometers. The 11 sovereigns who were just slightly too slow in fleeing were touched by it, and anything the gray energy touched was instantly transformed into nothingness. Even their sovereign sparks were melted away into nothingness and disappeared. This entire region was completely transformed into a region of death. Just now, the chief sovereigns of death and destruction, and the various other survivors, were so terrified that their faces turned white. Just now, the terrifying black hole which Linley's sword had created had spewed out limitless amounts of gray energy, which had represented annihilation. Anything touched by the gray energy, whether ordinary deities or mighty sovereigns, and even inanimate rocks and water, were transformed into nothingness. One step slower, and we would have all died. The chief sovereign of destruction remained extremely tense. Just now, what was that? The surviving sovereigns were completely terrified. Although they had seen how powerful Linley was, they had never been so terrified as they were now. The black hole that had suddenly vomited forth that grey energy was simply too terrifying. The nearer sovereigns all died. Not even their sovereign sparks remain. The chief sovereign of death's face was ashen. And that Linley, he was surrounded by that grey energy and transformed into nothingness as well. The grey energy created a region which sovereigns couldn't use their divine sense to scan. These sovereigns didn't know as to what had happened, exactly, when the grey energy had spread out within that region. But there was one thing they were certain of: everything within that region had been transformed into nothingness. Linley. Beirut's face was ashen. Bluefire's face was completely bloodless as well. They had never imagined that such an awe-inspiring turn of events would occur. Linley, whose power had suddenly skyrocketed, actually then vanished within that terrifying grey energy and disappeared. By now, the grey energy was flooding back towards the black hole. It completely vanished, and even the black hole was slowly shrinking, before finally disappearing as well. The terrifying energy wave caused astonishment in the entire infernal realm. Where is this place? Linley stared at his surroundings. The surrounding space was filled with that strange, foggy grey energy. His own 4 types of sovereign power had joined together and formed this exact same type of energy, which had then transformed his body and soul. Just now, his sword attack seemed to have shattered the skies, allowing this energy to cause the deaths of the many sovereigns. Linley turned to look, then saw a translucent membrane. At the opposite side of the translucent membrane was chaotic space. Where am I? Linley's gaze suddenly turned sharp as he stared in front of himself. Because someone had appeared in front of him. This person was dressed in unadorned hemp clothes. He had a head full of wild, tousled hair. This middle-aged man's face had an extremely excited smile. "Ha, it has been 1,000 grand kalpas, but my waiting is finally at an end." 1,000 grand kalpas. Linley was completely confused. "Second brother, come with me." The middle-aged man smiled, then extended a hand. He grabbed Linley by the arm, pulling him forward at high speed. What astonished Linley was, every single step this middle-aged man took covered a limitless amount of distance. His speed was incomprehensibly faster than Linley's. "Why do you address me as second brother?" Linley looked at him, puzzled. "And who are you?" "Ha, because you are the very first person, after the passage of countless years, who was able to break through the bindings of the cosmos and enter this place, this Hongmeng Grand Mist." The middle-aged man said with a clear laugh. "What is the cosmos?" Linley hurriedly asked. "You said I broke through the bindings of the cosmos. Are you saying that the countless planes I live in comprise the cosmos? To be more precise, the countless material planes, the 7 divine planes, the 4 higher planes, the various minor planes, and chaotic space, they combine to form a whole, which can be referred to as the cosmos." The middle-aged man smiled as he spoke. "As for this energy, I refer to it as the Grand Mist Spirit Energy." Linley took a deep breath. Indeed, the chief sovereign of fate had sensed that it seemed as though an invisible hand was controlling the countless planes, and had wanted to break free from this control. It now seemed as though the invisible hand was the mysterious middle-aged man in front of Linley. Grand Mist Spirit Energy. Linley stared carefully at the primal grey energy. "My home is up ahead." The middle-aged man pointed towards the front. In the center of that endless amount of primal energy, there was an island that was only a few dozen meters in circumference. This island had a thatched cottage built atop it, and by the side of the cottage, there was a thick, gnarled dwarf tree. Beneath the tree was a stone table and 2 stone benches. "Let's sit first," then chat. The middle-aged man laughed as he sat. Linley, filled with questions, sat down as well. Take a look. The middle-aged man waved his hand, and instantly, a watery mirror formed. A giant sphere emerged from the mirror, and this sphere was surrounded by 4 much smaller spheres. The middle-aged man laughed as he pointed towards the small sphere on the right. This is the cosmos you live in. What? Linley stared, slack-jawed. There are 3 other cosmos like mine? And an even larger one. Linley was truly stunned. The cosmos in the center is the main cosmos, while the 4 cosmos surrounding it are secondary cosmos. They are only 1/10 of the size of the main one. The middle-aged man smiled. The various cosmos all exist within the Hongmeng Grand Mist region. As for myself, my name is Hongmeng Grand Mist. Linley looked at the middle-aged man. As a matter of fact, the middle-aged man sighed. Linley. Let me put it to you this way. Long, long ago, this Grand Mist region gave birth to me. I was the only living creature within the Grand Mist. Linley nodded slightly. After a long, long period of time, I felt bored. I had a sudden flash of insight, and began to build the cosmos. First, I built up the main cosmos, but I felt that by itself, it wasn't stable enough, and so I then built the 4 much smaller secondary cosmos, forming a stable whole. Linley nodded. The energy I used to build the cosmos was this Grand Mist spirit energy. Hongmeng laughed as he pointed towards the primal gray energy. In the cosmos, I created the various living creatures. In order to ensure that the various races would be able to develop in equilibrium, I had to set many rules and edicts. Hongmeng laughed. For example, in your homeland, the 4 overgods in that secondary cosmos were actually created by myself, based on the 4 edicts that I set up. All they are able to do is carry out my orders, they don't have a shred of emotion at all. Linley's heart trembled. So the 4 overgods were nothing more than tools which this Hongmeng had randomly created. The larger a cosmos is, the more stable it comes. I allowed part of the Grand Mist to transform into the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. These 5 types of energy served as the foundation for the primary cosmos, and then gave birth to yin and yang, 2 opposing types of energy, as well as the tribulation power of lightning. Hongmeng laughed. As for the 4 secondary cosmos, they were small, and so they didn't need the 5 elements. I thus controlled the Grand Mist primal energy into 4 basic types of energy, earth, fire, water, and wind. They then gave birth to light and darkness, as well as the tribulation power of lightning. The Grand Mist was transformed into earth, fire, water, and wind. Linley was stunned. He was beginning to understand. The main cosmos was formed from a foundation of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, the 5 elements. As for the secondary cosmos, they were formed from a foundation of 4 types of energy, earth, fire, water, wind. Although I created the main cosmos and the 4 secondary cosmos, it is very, very difficult for the living creatures within the cosmos to escape into the outside world. Hongmeng sighed. Very difficult. Linley asked, puzzled. Right. The main cosmos is infinitely vast. There are many, many living creatures which are far more powerful than the sovereigns of your secondary universe. Amongst them are god kings and even exalted celestials, who are capable of sensing the laws of space and the laws of time. If they were to go into your secondary cosmos, they would be capable of shattering the binds of that cosmos. Linley was stunned. The experts of that cosmos were actually so numerous. However, the stability of the secondary cosmos is inferior to the main cosmos, and thus I wouldn't permit life forms capable of comprehending the laws of time and space to exist within them. Thus, within the secondary cosmos, it is impossible to train in space and time. At most, a few innate divine abilities would be able to impact them. Hongmeng laughed. Linley nodded slightly. However, Linley, your current level of power has surpassed even the most powerful of exalted celestials of the main cosmos. Hongmeng laughed. Oh. Linley was rather surprised. Because you have a grand mist body. Hongmeng laughed. There are two types of powerful bodies. The most powerful is the inextinguishable Xianhuang body, while the slightly weaker one is the grand mist body. You must understand that the grand mist energy is the most basic level of energy there is. Even the exalted celestials of the main cosmos who enter this place will be dissolved into grand mist energy. Because a grand mist body is formed from grand mist energy to begin with, the grand mist energy here won't harm it. Hongmeng explained. Then where does this indestructible Xianhuang body come from? Linley asked. Afterwards, when you, too, set up a cosmos and establish a universe, you will naturally begin to generate Xianhuang energy, which will gather in your body, causing it to once more rise in power. You will then gain the most powerful indestructible Xianhuang body. Hongmeng laughed. Me? Create a cosmos? Linley was stunned. Yes. Like I did. Hongmeng laughed. I care not one whit for the lives and deaths of the living creatures within the cosmos. I can create countless living creatures at any time. I only care about those who are able to, on their own, break free of the bindings of their universe and surviving in this place. You are worthy of being the brother of myself, Hongmeng. Hongmeng laughed as he waved his hand, and a single leaf suddenly floated down from the nearby tree. The leaf flashed with light. I've imprinted the methods for creating a cosmos within this leaf. Use your spiritual energy to look into it, and you'll understand everything. Hongmeng handed the leaf to Linley. Linley looked at Hongmeng, then accepted it. Countless amounts of knowledge instantly flooded into Linley's mind. In an instant, Linley's understanding of the Grand Mist region reached an extremely deep level. He even fully understood the various ways by which the Grand Mist could be used, such as how it could be divided into the 5 elements, or resolved into earth, fire, water, and wind. So, for me to break through the cosmos required so many coincidences. It was so difficult. Linley now completely understood. Right. Hongmeng nodded and laughed. You just so happen to have 4 clones of earth, fire, water, and wind. If you had an extra one, it wouldn't have worked. If you had one less, it also wouldn't have worked. And then, you successfully underwent a soul mutation. This gave you a chance, but, the 4 types of energy in the universe are actually 4 different types of sovereign energy. You had to be able to control those 4 types of sovereign energy and fuse them, and so you had to fuse 4 sovereign sparks. Linley laughed and nodded bitterly. He now understood. He had 4 clones of earth, fire, water, and wind, then underwent a soul mutation, and then became a sovereign of all 4 elements. Only then had he been able to fuse the 4 types of sovereign energy into Grand Mist energy. The difficulty of every single step was exceedingly great. To break free from the main cosmos is just as difficult. Grand Mist laughed calmly. This is why, despite the passage of more than 1,000 Grand Kalpas, you are the only one to emerge here. Big brother Hongmeng, you spoke of more than 1,000 Grand Kalpas. How long is a Grand Kalpa, exactly? Linley could tell that Grand Kalpas represented a unit of time, but how long? Each Grand Kalpa represents 6 quadrillion years. Hongmeng laughed. Linley sucked in a deep breath. More than 1,000 Grand Kalpas represented more than 6 quintillion years. In his own cosmos, a planar war was carried out every trillion years. It seemed as though there had been millions of planar wars. How incredible! Linley sighed in praise. Big brother Hongmeng, your 4 secondary cosmos all have different cultures. My home cosmos is the magic cosmos. The other 3 cosmos are the machine cosmos, the bioform cosmos, and the immortal/devil cosmos. As for the main cosmos, it includes everything. Incredible. Linley was now completely stunned. Only now did he realize that aside from the elemental laws, there were many other ways of training that were completely different. There were machines, there were bioforms, and there were even immortal and devil cultivation paths. Haha, in the future, you'll create your own cosmos as well. When you have time, you can go to my cosmos and take a look. Hongmeng laughed. Oh. Before this, you must take a look at something. What? Linley was puzzled. Hongmeng waved his hand, and instantly, a golden banner flew over from countless kilometers away, landing nearby Linley. This golden banner contained an awe-inspiring prestige which made Linley's heart clench. It was roughly 6 meters long and half a meter wide. Oh, there are words on the back. Linley saw them right away. Behind this golden banner there was a word that was roughly the same size as the banner. The word was very unique. Linley was certain that he had never seen this language before. But as he looked at it, he understood the meaning of this words. Meng Mist. This is the Golden Grand Mist banner. Hongmeng laughed. It, too, was born from the Grand Mist space. Look at the first line on the Golden Grand Mist banner. Linley looked at it. The very first line on the Golden Grand Mist banner had a single word on it. Hong Grand. Or, to be precise, the upper left corner of the Golden Grand Mist banner had just this single word. Anyone whose name is on this Golden Grand Mist banner will become a controller of the Grand Mist region. Upon being a controller of the Grand Mist region, you will be able to freely use the energy of any cosmos, and will be able to calculate the destinies of virtually all living creatures. Hongmeng laughed. But if you wish for your name to be on the Golden Grand Mist banner, you have to, at the very least, break through your cosmos and come to the Grand Mist region. Linley, control a hint of your spiritual energy and send it into the banner. Hongmeng said. Linley nodded, extending out some of his spiritual energy. The Golden Grand Mist banner instantly began to absorb that spiritual energy, and on the first line, next to the Hong character, another character appeared, Lin. Instantly, Linley's mind was once more flooded with information, as well as quite a few divine abilities. So, there are different levels of Grand Mist controllers as well. Linley began to laugh. I'm actually the same as you, elder brother, we are first-rank Grand Mist controllers. Naturally. The Grand Mist space is vast and endless, but because of stability reasons, the Golden Grand Mist banner will only, at most, permit us to create a total of 4 cosmos like the main cosmos I created. Naturally, there will only be 4 first-rank Grand Mist controllers. The 5th controller will naturally have a lower ranking, and the others will all be limited by us. Linley nodded. Only the highest-ranking Grand Mist controllers would understand everything. From today onwards, I have a new name of my own, then, Linmen. Linley let out a sigh. Right. Let the cosmos that you create in the future be known as the Linmen cosmos. Hongmeng laughed. A hint of solemnity appeared on Linley's face. Alas, my grandpa Douring, after becoming a Grand Mist controller, Linley understood that there was no way a person whose soul had dissipated could be brought to life. But of course, Linley was capable of creating new life. He could create a new, identical Grandpa Douring, one who even had the same memories as Grandpa Douring. Only, that would only be a duplicate, it wouldn't be the true Grandpa Douring. Grandpa Douring, Linley silently engraved Grandpa Douring into his heart. After becoming a Grand Mist controller, he had learned many things. Linley's mindset had changed, and he had become far more at ease and natural than before. Oh, big brother, it seems I have to make a trip back. Linley couldn't help but laugh. Right. Your family members are going frantic. Hongmeng laughed. Right. Your home cosmos, in the future, you can help me manage it. You are now a Grand Mist controller, your divine abilities aren't much weaker than mine. But I have no experience. What if I wreck it? Linley smirked. Then you'll have to help me create a new one, that's all. Hongmeng laughed casually. As a Grand Mist controller capable of creating a cosmos, it was true that many of Linley's abilities were no weaker than Hongmeng's. Only, as he had yet to actually create a new cosmos, Linley's abilities were slightly deficient. Then I'll go back now. Linley turned and took a single step. He crossed an unfathomably long distance with that step, then entered the plane of the infernal realm. In the air above the chaotic sea, a sky-blue-robed Linley laughed calmly as he stood there. So many sovereigns died. I have to replenish the sovereign sparks. With a wave of his hand, Linley began to manifest one sovereign spark after another. One sovereign spark after another shot out from his hands, and then, Linley turned to look towards the Skyrite Mountains. Taking but a single step, Linley vanished. When Linley had originally departed from his home cosmos, Linley's family had grown frantic. All of them were now gathered within his estate, and it was so quiet as to cause one to shudder. Boss, boss, Bibi's tears were flowing. I can't sense my boss's spiritual aura any longer. I can't sense it. Delia stood there, her eyes shut, her entire body shaking. Beirut and Blue Fire exchanged glances, bitter smiles on their faces. Father, Wade, Taylor, and Sasha were all agonized as well. Third bro, George, Yale, and Reynolds were together as well. They didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Everyone had held on to hope, but upon hearing Bibi say that he could no longer sense Linley's spiritual aura, everyone grew despondent. Why did it have to be like this? Linley's mother, Lena, was already reduced to a puddle of tears. It's all my fault, my fault. The nearby hog held her in his arms, sighing to himself, his face ashen. Just as everyone was gripped by grief. Suddenly, Bibi's eyes suddenly lit up. He originally hadn't been able to sense Linley's aura at all, but now, he could. Actually, previously, Linley had left this cosmos, so how could Bibi possibly sense Linley's existence? But now that Linley had returned, Bibi naturally was able to sense him again. Delia was still lost in her memories and her utter grief. However, within her blurred field of vision, a familiar figure suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Delia hurriedly wiped her tears away, looking towards the figure carefully. Boss! Bibi called out jubilantly. He was the first to speak. The others stared, wide-eyed, at the person who had appeared out of nowhere. A sky-blue-robed man, with that familiar face. Third bro, Yale, George, and Reynolds rushed over simultaneously. Linley. Father. Big brother. Finished.